Hey everyone, welcome back to another journey into the bizarre corners of human experience. Tonight we're diving headfirst into something that sounds like it came straight out of a Hollywood thriller, but trust me, reality is always stranger than fiction. We're talking about spies, those shadowy figures who shaped history from behind closed doors, and the most unlikely intelligence network of all, their dreams. From Cold War operatives who swore their subconscious was feeding them classified intel, to ancient informants who claimed divine messages in their sleep, we're exploring cases where the boundary between the dream world and espionage got, well, let's just say uncomfortably thin. Now, before we slip into this rabbit hole together, take a moment to hit that like button if you enjoy these deep dives into the weird and wonderful. And subscribe, but only if you genuinely find yourself coming back for more of these midnight mysteries. Drop a comment too. Let me know where in the world you're listening from and what ungodly hour it is for you right now. And hey, if you find yourself drifting off somewhere between the CIA's dream experiments and that bizarre case from 1960s Moscow, well, that's perfectly fine. Sometimes the best way to understand dreams is to slip into them yourself. Sweet dreams, and let's begin. Picture this, it's 1962, height of the Cold War, and a British MI6 operative codenamed Nightingale is stationed in Helsinki. Now, this guy, let's call him David Matthews because that's probably not his real name anyway, had been struggling for months to crack a Soviet communication pattern that was driving the entire intelligence community absolutely mad. The Russians were using this absolutely diabolical cipher that had stumped the best cryptographers at Vauxhall Cross. We're talking about the kind of mathematical torture that makes grown men weep into their tea and consider career changes. Matthews would go to bed every night with pages of intercepted transmissions scattered across his desk like confetti from hell, numbers dancing in his head like some sort of numerical nightmare that refused to make sense. For context, this was during one of the tensest periods of the Cold War. The Berlin Wall had just gone up the year before, the Bay of Pigs invasion had been a spectacular disaster, and everyone was holding their breath wondering if the world was about to end in nuclear fire. Intelligence was everything. The difference between peace and annihilation could literally come down to decoding the right message at the right time. Matthews had been in Helsinki for 8 months, officially working as a cultural attaché at the British Embassy, which is diplomatic speak for professional spy. His real job was intercepting and analyzing Soviet communications coming out of the Leningrad naval base. The Soviets were testing new submarine designs, developing underwater missile systems, and generally doing things that made NATO very, very nervous. But this particular cipher codenamed Blackbird by British intelligence was like nothing they'd ever seen. It wasn't just complex, it was almost organic in its structure. The patterns seemed to shift and evolve, as if the code itself was learning and adapting. Traditional cryptographic approaches failed spectacularly. Mathematical analysis hit dead ends. Even the early computer systems at GCHQ couldn't crack it. The cipher had first appeared in Soviet transmissions in February 1962, and by March it was clear that this wasn't just another variation of existing Soviet codes. The mathematical complexity was staggering: multiple layers of encryption, variable substitution patterns, and what appeared to be random numerical sequences that defied conventional analysis. The code seemed to incorporate elements of music theory, advanced mathematics, and possibly even biological patterns. Matthews was chosen for the Helsinki assignment because he had an unusual background: classical music training from Oxford before he was recruited by MI6. The theory was that his musical ear might pick up rhythmic patterns in the coded transmissions that pure mathematicians would miss. It was a long shot, but intelligence work is full of long shots that occasionally pay off. The assignment came after Matthews had already proven himself in more conventional operations. He'd served in Berlin during the early days of the Wall, working as a case officer running agents in East Germany. His ability to analyze patterns, whether in human behavior or electronic communications, had caught the attention of senior officers at MI6. When Blackbird emerged as a priority target, Matthews seemed like the perfect candidate to tackle it. For months, Matthews immersed himself in these intercepted messages. His Helsinki apartment became a cryptographer's nightmare or paradise, depending on your perspective. The walls were covered with charts showing frequency analysis, mathematical progressions, and pattern recognition attempts. Tables groaned under the weight of transcription equipment, oscilloscopes, and primitive computer printouts. The smell of cigarettes and strong coffee permeated everything, mixed with the electronic hum of monitoring equipment that ran 24 hours a day. Matthews would listen to the intercepted transmissions on reel-to-reel tape players, playing them at different speeds, filtering out background noise, isolating individual signal components. He transcribed everything by hand partly because the equipment wasn't sophisticated enough for automatic transcription, but mainly because he believed that the physical act of writing might reveal patterns that mechanical analysis would miss. The psychological toll was enormous. Matthews started losing weight, dropping from his normal 175 pounds to barely 150. He developed chronic insomnia, often working through the night and catching only brief naps during the day. His landlord complained about the constant sound of typing and radio static coming from his flat. His social life, what little existed for a deep-cover intelligence officer, disappeared entirely. His handler, Richard Sterling, was a 20-year veteran of MI6 who'd served in some of the most dangerous postings during World War II. Sterling had seen operatives crack under pressure before, and he was getting worried about Matthews' obsessive behavior. In his weekly reports back to London, Sterling noted Nightingale showing increasing signs of operational stress. Subject has become fixated on Blackbird analysis to the exclusion of other intelligence-gathering duties. Sleep patterns disrupted, social contacts minimal. Recommend psychological evaluation and possible rotation to different assignment, but Matthews refused to give up. He was convinced that the key was hidden somewhere in the patterns, that his musical background would eventually reveal the secret that had eluded everyone else. The musical connection wasn't just theoretical. Matthews had discovered that many of the numerical sequences, when converted to musical notes, produced recognizable melodic fragments. Not complete melodies, but tantalizing hints that there was something deeper going on. He started playing these musical fragments on his piano, a battered upright he'd bought from a Finnish music teacher who was emigrating to Sweden. The neighbors complained about the bizarre, discordant music coming from his apartment at all hours. The sounds were haunting, almost otherworldly, not quite random noise, but not quite music either. Like hearing fragments of a symphony played in the wrong order by an orchestra that had lost half its instruments. Matthews became convinced that the Soviet cryptographers had built their cipher around musical principles. It made sense. In a twisted way, Russian culture had always placed enormous emphasis on musical education, and many Soviet intellectuals had deep knowledge of both mathematics and music. If you wanted to create a cipher that Western cryptographers couldn't crack, why not base it on principles that were deeply embedded in Russian cultural knowledge, but foreign to Western analytical approaches? The breakthrough or breakdown, depending on how you look at it, came on the night of October 15, 1962. This was exactly 1 week into the Cuban Missile Crisis, though Matthews didn't know that at the time. Communications security was so tight that even senior intelligence officers weren't getting the full picture of how close the world was to nuclear war. Matthews had been working on a particularly complex transmission, nearly 800 numbers, arranged in what appeared to be completely random sequences. He'd been at it for 18 hours straight, surviving on black coffee and the kind of grim determination that borders on madness. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands were shaking from too much caffeine, and he was beginning to hallucinate mathematical symbols floating in his peripheral vision. The transmission had arrived that morning from the Soviet naval base at Severodvinsk, where the Russians were building their newest class of nuclear submarines. British intelligence knew something big was happening. Their satellite photos showed increased activity, more personnel, new construction projects. But without being able to decode the communications, they were operating blind. By 2 a.m., Matthews had filled 17 pages with calculations, tried dozens of different analytical approaches, and gotten absolutely nowhere. The numbers seemed to mock him, sitting there in neat rows like mathematical soldiers that refused to surrender their secrets. In desperation, he tried playing portions of the transmission on his piano, hoping that the musical conversion might reveal something his mathematical analysis had missed. The resulting sounds were even more discordant than usual harsh, jagged musical phrases that hurt to listen to. But somewhere in the chaos, Matthews thought he heard something familiar, a melodic fragment that reminded him of a Russian folk song he'd learned during his Oxford years. It was just a few notes, barely recognizable, but it was there. Exhausted beyond measure, Matthews finally collapsed into bed around 3:15 a.m. with the unsolved transmission still running through his head like a broken record. The last thing he remembered before falling asleep was the haunting melody fragment he'd discovered, playing over and over in his mind like a musical loop that wouldn't stop. And then he had the dream. This wasn't your average anxiety dream about forgetting to wear pants to work or showing up late for an exam. This was something entirely different, vivid, detailed, almost hyperreal in its clarity. The colors were more saturated than real life, the sounds more precise than actual hearing, the sensations more intense than physical reality. In the dream, Matthews found himself in a concert hall he'd never seen before, but which felt strangely familiar. The architecture was distinctly Russian ornate Baroque styling with gold leaf decorations, massive crystal chandeliers, and those characteristic onion domes visible through tall windows that looked out onto a snowy landscape. The concert hall was enormous, with multiple tiers of balconies rising up into shadows that seemed to extend infinitely upward. He was sitting at a grand piano on stage, and the audience was filled with hundreds of shadowy figures in formal evening wear. But here's the weird part. Matthews couldn't play piano. He'd studied music theory at Oxford, and he could read music, but his instrument was violin, not piano. He could barely pick out simple melodies on a keyboard, let alone perform in front of an audience. Yet in the dream, his fingers moved across the keys with impossible skill, as if he'd been playing piano professionally for decades. The music that emerged was unlike anything he'd ever heard, complex, layered, mathematically precise, yet emotionally moving. It was like listening to Bach and Rachmaninoff and modern jazz all simultaneously, as if different musical traditions were being woven together into something entirely new. The piece seemed to tell a story. There were themes that repeated and evolved, harmonies that built upon each other in increasingly complex ways, rhythmic patterns that shifted and developed throughout the performance. It was like watching the musical equivalent of advanced calculus, as if someone had translated a complex mathematical proof into sound. But the truly bizarre part came when Matthews realized that the audience in his dream wasn't just passively listening. They were actively responding to the music in coordinated ways. As he played certain passages, specific figures in the audience would stand up, move to different seats, or make subtle hand gestures. Others would turn pages in programs they were holding, or adjust their positions in ways that seemed choreographed to match the musical phrases. It was like watching an elaborate dance performed by hundreds of people, all perfectly synchronized to the music he was playing. But more than that, as Matthews continued playing, he began to understand that the audience members weren't random people. Each figure represented something specific: numbers, mathematical relationships, cryptographic keys. The elderly woman in the front row, who stood up during the opening theme, represented the number sequence that began each Blackbird transmission. The young man in the balcony who raised his hand during a particular harmonic passage corresponded to the mathematical constant that governed the cipher's substitution pattern. The group of musicians in the orchestra section who turned their sheet. Music in unison showed him how the numerical sequences were meant to be rearranged. Suddenly, in that strange logic that only makes sense in dreams, Matthews understood everything. The audience members were showing him how the numbers in the Blackbird cipher related to each other, and the melody he was playing was the key that unlocked those mathematical relationships. The Russian cryptographers hadn't just created a cipher, they'd created a musical composition where the security lay not in the individual notes, but in understanding the overall harmonic structure. The revelation was so intense that Matthews felt like his consciousness was expanding, as if his mind was capable of processing vastly more information than usual. He could see the mathematical relationships as visual patterns, hear the numerical sequences as musical phrases, feel the cryptographic structure as physical architecture that he could walk through and explore. In the dream, he played the complete piece from beginning to end, a performance that seemed to last hours but also felt like it occurred instantaneously. When the final notes faded away, the entire audience stood and applauded. But their applause sounded like the clicking of telegraph keys, transmitting the decoded message directly into his consciousness. Matthews woke up at exactly 6:17 a.m. He remembered checking the clock because the time seemed significant somehow, as if it was part of the message he'd received. The melody from his dream was still ringing in his ears with perfect clarity, note for note exactly as he'd played it in the concert hall of his unconscious mind. Without even getting dressed, Matthews stumbled to his piano in his pajamas and began picking out the tune from his dream. His fingers, which had never been able to play piano with any real skill in waking life, somehow remembered exactly how the piece should sound. It was as if the dream had temporarily downloaded piano-playing abilities directly into his motor memory. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, sad, and triumphant at the same time, with a distinctly Russian character that reminded him of Tchaikovsky or Rachmaninoff, but with modern harmonic elements that made it sound almost contemporary. As he played, Matthews transcribed the melody into musical notation, his hands moving across the keyboard while his mind automatically wrote down the corresponding notes. Then began the painstaking process of converting the notes back into numbers using various mathematical relationships. Each note corresponded to a specific numerical value based on its position in the musical scale, its harmonic relationship to other notes, and its place in the overall structure of the piece. It was like reverse engineering a mathematical equation from its musical expression. When Matthews applied this musical key to the Blackbird transmission he'd been working on the night before, something extraordinary happened. The seemingly random numbers suddenly revealed themselves as coordinates, dates, personnel assignments, and detailed technical specifications. The transmission contained information about Soviet submarine movements in the Baltic Sea, including the precise positions of nuclear missile submarines that were being deployed as part of what would later become known as the Cuban Missile Crisis. But it wasn't just that one transmission. Matthews quickly applied his musical key to other Blackbird intercepts they'd collected over the previous months. One by one, they yielded their secrets like flowers blooming in fast-forward photography. Troop movements in Eastern Europe, naval exercises in the Arctic Ocean, communication protocols for Soviet nuclear forces, technical specifications for new missile systems intelligence that would prove absolutely crucial in the days and weeks to follow. The decoded intelligence was staggering in its scope and detail. Soviet submarine positions that NATO had been unable to track, missile deployment schedules that revealed the timeline of the Cuban crisis, communication codes that would allow further interception of Soviet military traffic. It was like suddenly being handed a detailed map of Soviet military capabilities and intentions at the most critical moment of the Cold War. Matthews immediately contacted his handler through emergency channels, using a coded telephone call to request an urgent meeting. Sterling arrived at the apartment within an hour, took one look at the decoded transmissions spread across Matthews' kitchen table, and nearly dropped his coffee cup. The intelligence was so valuable, so detailed, that Sterling's first instinct was to suspect disinformation, the kind of elaborate deception that intelligence agencies sometimes use to mislead their enemies. But verification came quickly through multiple independent sources. The submarine positions Matthews had decoded were confirmed by NATO sonar tracking systems within hours. The troop movements matched reconnaissance satellite photos that arrived the next day. The communication protocols aligned perfectly with other intelligence from completely different sources. Everything checked out, it was all legitimate, all accurate, all incredibly valuable. Within 48 hours, the decoded intelligence was on the desks of senior officials in London, Washington, and NATO headquarters in Brussels. Prime Minister Macmillan was briefed personally. President Kennedy received a detailed summary. The information about Soviet submarine positions allowed Western naval forces to track and monitor nuclear missile submarines that had been operating undetected in the Atlantic, some of them just a few hundred miles from major American cities. Most significantly, the intelligence provided crucial insights into Soviet military thinking during the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was reaching its peak tension at exactly the same time Matthews made his breakthrough. The decoded communications revealed Soviet concerns about American naval movements, their contingency plans for escalating the crisis, and most importantly, their genuine desire to avoid nuclear war despite their public posturing. Here's where things get really weird, and I mean genuinely disturbing in ways that'll make you question everything. You think you know about consciousness and espionage. You remember Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, right? The couple who got the electric chair in 1953 for passing atomic secrets to the Soviets? Well, what didn't make it into the history books, what got buried so deep it practically needed archaeological excavation to uncover, was the strange phenomenon reported by several members of their spy ring. Harry Gold, Klaus Fuchs, David Greenglass, and at least 6 other confirmed members of what the FBI called the Rosenberg Network, independently reported having remarkably similar dreams during the months they were passing information about the Manhattan Project. And when I say similar, I don't mean vaguely related anxiety dreams about getting caught. I'm talking about dreams so specific, so detailed, so identical in their core elements that when they compared notes later, it was like they'd all attended the same nighttime briefing in some parallel dimension. The phenomenon first came to light during the FBI interrogations. Following the network's exposure in 1950, Special Agent Robert Lamfer, who led the investigation, initially dismissed these dream reports as either coordinated lies or stress-induced hallucinations. But as the interviews progressed and the details accumulated, even hardened FBI agents began to take notice. The consistency was unsettling, too precise to be coincidence, too bizarre to be fabricated. Let's start with Harry Gold, the courier who connected the various members of the spy ring. Gold was a Philadelphia chemist who had been recruited by Soviet intelligence in the 1930s, initially to steal industrial secrets before graduating to atomic espionage. He was methodical, careful, paranoid, exactly the kind of person who pays attention to details and remembers them accurately. During his FBI interrogation in June 1950, Gold mentioned almost casually that he'd been having strange dreams about his espionage activities. The interviewing agents initially ignored this, focusing on more concrete evidence. But Gold kept returning to the dreams, insisting they were somehow significant. Finally, Agent Lamfer decided to let Gold talk, if only to see where this bizarre tangent might lead. Gold described dreams that always followed the same basic pattern. He would find himself in this sterile, blindingly white room that felt simultaneously enormous and claustrophobic. The walls were covered with blackboards containing complex mathematical equations formulas dealing with nuclear fission, atomic chain reactions, bomb design specifications. In the dreams, Gold could understand these equations perfectly, even though his waking knowledge of nuclear physics was limited to what he'd picked up from stolen documents. But here's where it gets really strange. The room was always populated by the same group of people. Faceless figures in white lab coats who moved around the room pointing to different equations, making adjustments to calculations, adding new formulas. Gold couldn't see their faces clearly, they were always slightly blurred, as if he was looking at them through frosted glass, but he had the distinct impression that he knew these people, that they were colleagues or collaborators in some vast scientific project. The dreams had a ritualistic quality. Gold would enter the white room through a door that appeared in different locations each time, sometimes in the wall, sometimes in the floor, once memorably in the ceiling. He would spend what felt like hours studying the equations on the blackboards, understanding complex nuclear physics concepts that should have been beyond his educational background. Then, at the end of each dream, the faceless figures would gather around him and collectively point to a specific formula or calculation, as if highlighting something particularly important. Gold started having these dreams in late 1944, around the time he began receiving atomic secrets from Klaus Fuchs at Los Alamos. Initially, they occurred maybe once a month, but as his involvement in atomic espionage intensified, the dreams became more frequent, eventually happening nearly every night during the peak period of his activities in 1945. Now, here's where the FBI investigation took an unexpected turn. When agents interviewed Klaus Fuchs at his British prison cell in 1950, Fuchs independently described having very similar dreams during the same time period. The German-born physicist, who had been one of the key scientists working on the Manhattan Project, reported dreams about a white room with blackboards covered in nuclear equations. But Fuchs' version had additional details that Gold hadn't mentioned. In Fuchs' dreams, the white room had windows that looked out onto a desert landscape that he recognized as the New Mexico terrain around Los Alamos. More significantly, Fuchs reported that in his dreams, he could see other people in the room who weren't the faceless, lab coat figures people he recognized as fellow spies from the Rosenberg network, even though he'd never met most of them in waking life. David Greenglass, Ethel Rosenberg's brother, who worked as a machinist at Los Alamos, provided the third piece of this puzzle. During his cooperation with FBI investigators, Greenglass described having recurring dreams about being in a big white laboratory, where he was surrounded by people working on the bomb stuff. Like Gold and Fuchs, Greenglass reported that in these dreams he could understand complex nuclear physics that was far beyond his actual technical training. But Greenglass added a detail that made FBI agents' blood run cold in his dreams. He could see Julius and Ethel Rosenberg standing at one of the blackboards, working through calculations related to implosion trigger mechanisms for plutonium bombs. This was particularly disturbing because Greenglass later testified that Julius had specifically asked him to sketch and memorize details about implosion triggers information that would have been crucial to Soviet atomic bomb development. The pattern continued as FBI agents interviewed other members of the network. Morton Sobel, an electrical engineer who passed radar and sonar secrets to the Soviets, reported dreams about the White Room. So did several other conspirators whose names remain classified even today. Each person described essentially the same environment, sterile white room. Blackboards covered with nuclear equations, faceless figures in lab coats, and the unmistakable presence of other network members working collaboratively on atomic secrets. What made this phenomenon genuinely terrifying from a security perspective was that sometimes the information in these dreams was accurate to details the dreamers hadn't yet stolen or received through normal espionage channels. Harry Gold later told FBI investigators that he dreamed about a specific plutonium refinement process in December 1944, 2 weeks before Klaus Fuchs actually photographed the documents containing that exact information at Los Alamos. David Greenglass described dreaming about modifications to the Fat Man bomb design in early 1945, before he had access to the blueprints he would later steal for Julius Rosenberg. Morton Sobel reported dreams about radar countermeasures that the U.S. military was developing months before he gained access to those classified projects through his work at Reeves Instrument Company. The FBI's concern wasn't just about the security implications, though those were staggering enough. Intelligence officials were genuinely disturbed by the possibility that Soviet espionage had somehow tapped into some form of collective, unconscious phenomenon. Was this evidence of advanced Soviet mind control technology? Hypnosis techniques that could coordinate the subconscious minds of multiple agents? Or something even more exotic? J. Edgar Hoover personally ordered a classified investigation into what FBI files referred to as the dream phenomenon. A team of psychologists, psychiatrists, and intelligence analysts was assembled to study the reports and determine whether this represented a new form of espionage technique that American intelligence needed to understand and counter. Dr. Margaret Brennan, a psychiatrist who worked with the Office of Strategic Services during World War II, led the psychological analysis. Her classified report, portions of which were finally declassified in 1995, makes for fascinating and disturbing reading. Brennan concluded that the shared dreams were genuine psychological phenomena, not fabricated stories or coordinated deception. The level of detail and consistency across multiple subjects suggests a form of collective, unconscious experience that cannot be explained by conventional psychological models, Brennan wrote. The subjects appear to be accessing shared information through some form of group mental phenomenon that occurs during sleep states. But Brennan's report raised more questions than it answered. How was such a phenomenon possible? Was it naturally occurring or had it been artificially induced? If the latter, what techniques were being used and by whom? The implications for both espionage and human psychology were staggering. The investigation took on new urgency when interrogators discovered that the shared dreams weren't limited to the Rosenberg network. FBI counterintelligence operations had identified several other Soviet spy rings operating in the United States during the 1940s. And when agents began asking about dreams during their interrogations, similar patterns emerged. A network of Soviet agents operating in the Pacific Northwest focused on stealing aircraft and radar technology from Boeing and other defense contractors reported shared dreams about hangars filled with advanced aircraft designs. A separate ring targeting chemical weapons research described collective dreams about laboratories where they observed the development of nerve agents and biological weapons. Most disturbing of all, a group of Soviet agents who had infiltrated the early stages of hydrogen bomb research reported dreams about witnessing thermonuclear weapon tests that wouldn't actually occur until several years later. Edward Teller, who led the American hydrogen bomb program, was briefed on these reports and reportedly became obsessed with the security implications. The pattern was always the same, multiple members of the same spy network having remarkably similar dreams that contained accurate information about their espionage targets, sometimes including details they hadn't yet obtained through conventional means. It was as if the act of conspiring together for espionage purposes had somehow created a shared unconscious intelligence gathering capability. Soviet intelligence files, released after the collapse of the USSR, provide another perspective on this phenomenon. KGB documents from the 1950s show that Soviet handlers were aware of what they called group dreaming phenomena among their American agents. Rather than being disturbed by these reports, Soviet intelligence appeared to view them as a valuable additional source of information. A 1951 KGB memo, translated and declassified by Russian authorities in 1992, notes, American agents continue to report shared dream experiences containing valuable intelligence. Phenomenon appears to enhance information gathering capabilities beyond normal operational parameters. Recommend continued monitoring and analysis of dream reports from all agent networks. The memo suggests that Soviet intelligence may have been actively encouraging or even inducing these shared dream experiences, though the specific techniques remain classified. References in other KGB documents mention sleep state conditioning and collective unconscious activation protocols, but the details of these methods have never been revealed. The most chilling aspect of the entire phenomenon emerged during Julius Rosenberg's final interrogation before his execution. In a last-ditch effort to save his life, Rosenberg agreed to answer some questions about his espionage activities. When asked about the shared dreams reported by network members, Rosenberg initially denied any knowledge of such experiences. But as the interrogation continued, Rosenberg eventually admitted that he too had been having the White Room dreams. More significantly, he claimed that the dreams had been deliberately induced as part of his recruitment and training by Soviet handlers. According to Rosenberg, Soviet intelligence had developed techniques for creating shared unconscious experiences among spy network members, enhancing their ability to coordinate activities and share information. They taught us how to dream together, Rosenberg reportedly told his interrogators. It was part of the training. They said it would make us better spies, help us work as a team even when we couldn't meet in person. The FBI transcript of this interrogation remains heavily classified, with only brief excerpts released through Freedom of Information Act requests. But those fragments suggest that Soviet intelligence had developed sophisticated, psychological techniques for manipulating the dreams and unconscious minds of their agents, techniques that American intelligence was completely unprepared to counter. The investigation into the Rosenberg network's shared dreams was abruptly terminated in 1953, shortly after Julius and Ethel Rosenberg's execution. Official FBI files simply note that the phenomenon ceased after the network was dismantled, with no further shared dream reports from the surviving members who cooperated with authorities. But declassified CIA documents from the 1960s show that American intelligence continued to study the phenomenon as part of their own mind control research programs. Projects like MKULTR included experiments designed to induce shared dream experiences among test subjects, with the goal of developing similar capabilities for American intelligence operations. The results of these experiments remain classified, but fragmentary evidence suggests that the CIA achieved some success in creating artificially induced shared dream experiences. Whether these techniques were ever deployed operationally is unknown, but the existence of the research programs demonstrates that American intelligence took the Rosenberg network shared dreams very seriously indeed. Today, more than 70 years later, the shared dreams of the Rosenberg spy network remain one of the most disturbing and unexplained phenomena in the history of espionage. Was it evidence of advanced Soviet mind control technology? A naturally occurring psychological phenomenon triggered by the stress and secrecy of espionage work? Or something even stranger, a glimpse into capabilities of human consciousness that we still don't understand? The truth is, we may never know. The key participants are all dead. The most sensitive documents remain classified, and the techniques that may have induced these shared dreams have been buried in the deepest vaults of intelligence agencies that have every reason to keep such capabilities secret. But the implications are staggering. If multiple people can share detailed, accurate dreams about sensitive information, what does that say about the nature of consciousness, memory, and information transfer? And if such phenomena can be artificially induced and controlled, what does that mean for the future of espionage, privacy, and human mental autonomy? The Rosenberg network took most of their secrets to their graves, but the mystery of their shared dreams continues to haunt intelligence analysts and neuroscientists alike, a reminder that the human mind may be capable of things we're only beginning to imagine. Fast forward to Vietnam, 1967, and we meet probably the most unlikely spy in the entire history of espionage, Madame Lin, a 67-year-old tea house owner in Saigon who became one of the CIA's most valuable assets without ever actively spying on anyone. But here's the twist that'll make your head spin. She never gathered intelligence through conventional methods. She never photographed documents, never overheard conversations, never cultivated sources, or ran dead drops. Instead, Lin claimed that her ancestors visited her dreams and told her things, important things, like which Viet Cong safe houses were about to be raided, where weapons caches were hidden, even the timing of major offensive operations. And before you roll your eyes and dismiss this as typical CIA desperation during a war that was going spectacularly wrong, let me tell you something that'll change your perspective. Lin's dream-sourced intelligence proved accurate in 47 out of 51 cases over an 18-month period. That's a success rate that would make any intelligence analyst weep with envy. Let's set the scene properly. By 1967, the Vietnam War had become a nightmare of bureaucratic incompetence, cultural misunderstanding, and tactical confusion. American intelligence operations in South Vietnam were a mess of competing agencies, confused objectives, and spectacular failures. The CIA, military intelligence, and various special operations units were often working at cross purposes, sometimes literally spying on each other instead of the enemy. Into this chaos walked CIA case officer Barry Broman, a 34-year-old former Marine who'd volunteered for Vietnam assignment after successful tours in Berlin and Bangkok. Broman was what the agency called a cultural operator, someone with the linguistic skills and cultural sensitivity needed for complex foreign assignments. He spoke fluent Vietnamese, had studied Southeast Asian history at Georgetown, and had a reputation for developing unusual but effective sources. Broman's assignment was to build human intelligence networks in Saigon's civilian population, focusing on areas that military intelligence couldn't effectively penetrate. The theory was sound. While American forces could monitor Viet Cong military communications and track large-scale movements, they desperately needed intelligence about urban guerrilla operations, civilian support networks, and local political dynamics that only Vietnamese sources could provide. The problem was that most Vietnamese civilians were understandably reluctant to cooperate with American intelligence. Those who weren't actively supporting the Viet Cong were often too frightened to get involved. too suspicious of American motives, or simply too focused on survival to worry about espionage games. Building effective networks required patience, cultural sensitivity, and a deep understanding of Vietnamese social dynamics that most American intelligence officers lacked. Broman had been in Saigon for 6 months when he first encountered Madame Lin. Her tea house, located on a narrow side street near the Central Market, was the kind of establishment that served as an informal community center for the neighborhood. Local residents would stop by throughout the day to drink tea, share gossip, conduct small business transactions, and stay connected with their extended social networks. The tea house was unremarkable from the outside, a narrow, two-story building squeezed between a bicycle repair shop and a fabric merchant. But inside, it was a masterpiece of Vietnamese traditional design, dark hardwood furniture, ceramic tea sets arranged with mathematical precision, walls decorated with calligraphy and ancestral portraits, and the constant aroma of jasmine tea mixed with incense burning at the small family shrine. Madame Lin herself was exactly what Hollywood casting would order for a wise Asian grandmother, tiny but dignified, with silver hair pulled back in a traditional bun, wearing the dark clothing of elderly Vietnamese women. She moved through her tea house with the efficiency of someone who'd been perfecting the same routines for decades, serving customers with a combination of formal courtesy and maternal warmth that made everyone feel simultaneously welcomed and slightly intimidated. Broman started visiting the tea house as part of his routine intelligence gathering, not because he suspected Lin of anything, but because tea houses were excellent places to overhear conversations, observe local social dynamics, and identify potential sources. For weeks, he was just another foreign customer, politely tolerated but largely ignored. The breakthrough came in March 1967 during one of Broman's regular Tuesday morning visits. As he sat in his usual corner table, sipping jasmine tea and reading a Vietnamese newspaper, Madame Lin approached his table with the kind of purposeful stride that suggested something important was about to happen. "Mr. Barry," she said in heavily accented but grammatically perfect English, "my grandfather's spirit visited me last night with news for you." Broman nearly choked on his tea. In 6 months of careful operational security, he'd never revealed his real name or his connection to American intelligence. Officially, he was Barry Morrison, a freelance journalist covering economic development stories. The fact that Lin knew his real identity was shocking enough, but the casual way she mentioned spirit visitations was completely outside anything in his training. "I'm sorry," Broman replied carefully, "but I think you have me confused with someone else. I'm a journalist, not—" Lin held up one weathered hand to stop him. "My grandfather says the house on Nguyen Thiep Street, the one with the blue shutters and the broken bicycle in front, will be empty tomorrow after lunch. The men who live there will go to the safe house on Tran Hung Dao Street, where they keep the weapons hidden under the floor of the back room." The specificity was unsettling. Nguyen Thiep Street was in a neighborhood that American intelligence had been monitoring for suspected Viet Cong activity, but they hadn't identified any specific safe houses. More importantly, Lin had provided actionable intelligence locations, timing, even details about weapon storage. Broman's training kicked in. Rule 1 of intelligence work: always verify information before acting on it, no matter how plausible it sounds. Rule 2: never trust sources who claim supernatural knowledge, because they're either delusional or playing games you don't understand. But something about Lin's calm, matter-of-fact delivery made Broman hesitate. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. "Because my grandfather says the war must end soon, and you Americans need help to understand what you cannot see. He also says you should eat more vegetables and stop smoking so many cigarettes, but that is personal advice, not intelligence." Against his better judgment, Broman decided to check out Lin's information. That afternoon, he conducted a discreet reconnaissance of the addresses she'd mentioned. The house on Nguyen Thiep Street appeared to be occupied by several young Vietnamese men who fit the demographic profile for Viet Cong operatives. The building on Tran Hung Dao Street showed signs of unusual activity, people coming and going at odd hours, windows that were always curtained, neighbors who seemed reluctant to discuss the residence. The next day, Broman positioned himself where he could observe both locations. Sure enough, around 2 p.m., Three men left the house with blue shutters and rode motorcycles across the city to the Tran Hung Dao address. Surveillance teams later confirmed that the abandoned house contained evidence of recent occupation, including communist propaganda materials and maps of Saigon marked with what appeared to be target locations. When Broman returned to the tea house the following Tuesday, Lynn greeted him with a knowing smile. "You found the empty house," she said. "It wasn't a question." "How did you know they would leave?" Broman asked. "My grandfather told me." He sees things that are going to happen, especially things involving violence and danger. It is a family gift, but also a burden. What followed was one of the most unusual recruitment conversations in CIA history. Broman couldn't officially approach Lynn as a potential asset. She had approached him, apparently already knowing about his intelligence connections. He couldn't apply standard recruitment techniques because she wasn't motivated by money, ideology, or personal grievances. And he certainly couldn't explain her apparent predictive abilities using any framework from his training. But the intelligence she'd provided was legitimate and valuable. If Lynn had access to more information through whatever methods she was using, the CIA would be foolish not to take advantage of it. Broman decided to treat the situation as an unconventional source relationship and see where it led. "If your grandfather has more information," Broman said carefully, "I would be interested in hearing it." The American military sometimes needs help understanding local situations. Lynn nodded as if this was the most natural conversation in the world. "He visits me in dreams, usually on Sunday nights or Wednesday nights. Sometimes he brings news about the fighting, sometimes about political matters, sometimes about dangers that are coming. I will share what I can if you promise to use the information wisely." And so began one of the most successful and bizarre intelligence relationships of the Vietnam War, every Tuesday and Friday. Broman would visit Lynn's tea house for what appeared to be casual social calls. Lynn would serve him tea, and if she'd received nocturnal visitations from her grandfather's spirit, would casually mention relevant information. The intelligence came in various forms. Sometimes Lynn would provide specific tactical information. "My grandfather says the bridge on Highway 4 will be attacked Thursday morning, probably with explosives hidden in a vegetable truck." Sometimes it was strategic intelligence. "The political committee is planning to change their safe house locations next month because they believe there is an informant in the district council." But most often, the information was more subtle warnings about areas to avoid, hints about shifting political loyalties, insights into Viet Cong morale and logistics that would have been impossible to obtain through conventional intelligence gathering. What made Lynn's intelligence so valuable was its accuracy and specificity. The bridge attack she predicted occurred exactly as described. The safe house relocations happened on schedule. Even seemingly minor details proved correct, like her prediction that a particular Viet Cong commander would be replaced due to family problems, which turned out to refer to the man's wife defecting to South Vietnamese forces. Broman began reporting Lynn's intelligence through official channels, though he was deliberately vague about his source and methods. His cables to CIA headquarters referred to a well-placed local source with access to Viet Cong planning documents, rather than an elderly tea house owner who claims to receive intelligence from her dead grandfather. The accuracy rate was extraordinary. Over the 18 months that Broman worked with Lynn, her predictions proved accurate in 47 out of 51 cases. The 4 failures were relatively minor timing errors rather than completely wrong information. By comparison, other CIA sources in Vietnam rarely achieved accuracy rates above 60%, and many were closer to 30%. But the most famous case, the one that made Lynn legendary within certain CIA, circles occurred in March 1967, just as their relationship was becoming established. Lynn arrived at her usual Tuesday meeting looking unusually distressed. "My great-grandfather visited me last night," she told Broman. "Not my grandfather, my great-grandfather, who died fighting the French." This is unusual because he rarely speaks about current events. The distinction was apparently significant in Lynn's spiritual cosmology. Her grandfather typically provided tactical and political intelligence, while her great-grandfather concerned himself with broader historical patterns and major events. "He showed me fire raining from the sky on the Street of Flowers," Lynn continued. Many people running, buildings burning, American soldiers dying. He said this will happen in 4 days on Saturday, when the sun is highest. The Street of Flowers Duong Ho was a busy commercial district in central Saigon with no obvious military significance. It was full of shops, restaurants, small offices, and civilian residences. There was no apparent reason why the Viet Cong would target such a location, and American intelligence had identified no military or government facilities in the area that might justify an attack. Broman's first instinct was to dismiss this prediction as either misunderstood symbolic imagery or simply wrong information. The Street of Flowers was one of the safest areas in Saigon, regularly patrolled by South Vietnamese police and far from any known Viet Cong operational zones. But something about Lin's distress convinced him to investigate further. The elderly woman was typically calm and matter-of-fact when delivering intelligence, but this time she seemed genuinely upset by what she'd seen in her dream. Her hands shook slightly as she served tea, and she kept glancing toward the family shrine as if seeking reassurance from her ancestral spirits. "My great-grandfather says this attack is different from the others," Lin added. "It is not about military targets or propaganda. Someone wants to send a message to the Americans to show that nowhere is safe." Against his better judgment and in violation of standard operating procedures that discouraged acting on single-source intelligence, Broman decided to investigate the Street of Flowers. What he discovered during a casual reconnaissance changed everything. Hidden in a small office building on the Street of Flowers was a CIA communication station that didn't officially exist. The facility, codenamed Songbird, was a joint CIA-NSA operation that intercepted and analyzed North Vietnamese and Chinese radio communications. It was so classified that even most CIA officers in Vietnam didn't know about it. The station had been established using a cover company that supposedly imported electronic equipment from Hong Kong. The office looked completely legitimate: business licenses, Vietnamese staff, actual commercial activities to maintain the deception. But in the basement, sophisticated radio intercept equipment monitored communist communications across Southeast Asia Broman wasn't supposed to know about. Songbird, his security clearance didn't include access to communication intercept operations. But his investigation of Lin's prediction had led him directly to one of the most sensitive intelligence facilities in South Vietnam. The implications were staggering. If Lin's great-grandfather had accurately identified this facility as a target for attack, it suggested that either North Vietnamese intelligence had somehow penetrated Songbird's security, or Lin had access to information through methods that defied conventional explanation. Broman immediately contacted his supervisors through secure channels. Reporting the potential threat to the Street of Flowers facility? His cable noted that he had received intelligence from a reliable source indicating an imminent attack on the specified location, but he was deliberately vague about the source's identity and methods. The response was swift and decisive. Within hours, the Songbird facility was evacuated, and the communication equipment was moved to a backup location. South Vietnamese security forces were quietly reinforced in the Street of Flowers district, and American military units were placed on alert for possible enemy action. 3 days later, exactly as Lin had predicted, the Viet Cong launched a coordinated mortar and rocket attack on the Street of Flowers. The assault began at 11:47 a.m., when the sun was indeed at its highest point. The building that had housed the CIA communication station took direct hits from at least 6 rockets, completely destroying the structure and killing 2 South Vietnamese security guards who hadn't received evacuation orders. The attack was clearly targeted and well planned. The Viet Cong had detailed intelligence about the building's layout, the communication equipment locations, and even the daily routine of the facility's personnel. Without Lin's warning, the attack would have killed dozens of American intelligence officers and compromised one of the most valuable communication intercept operations in Southeast Asia. But here's the truly unsettling part. Post-attack investigation revealed that the Viet Cong shouldn't have known about the Songbird facility at all. Security reviews found no evidence of penetration, no compromised personnel, no security breaches that would have revealed the facility's true purpose. The cover story had been perfect. the operational security impeccable. So how had North Vietnamese intelligence identified the facility? And how had Lin's great-grandfather known about the planned attack 4 days in advance? The official CIA after-action report, classified top secret and still heavily redacted 57 years later, noted, Source Tilith provided accurate early warning of enemy attack on sensitive facility through unknown intelligence methods. Attack would have resulted in significant casualties and major compromise of ongoing operations. Source reliability, inexplicably high. Recommend continued operational relationship despite unconventional methodology. Source Tilith was Lin's operational code name, chosen because of her profession as a tea house owner. The code name would appear in dozens of CIA cables over the following months as Lin continued providing accurate intelligence through her claimed communications with deceased ancestors. But the Songbird incident fundamentally changed how CIA leadership viewed Lin's intelligence. What had initially seemed like an interesting local source with unusual methods was now recognized as potentially the most valuable human intelligence asset in Vietnam. The accuracy of her predictions, combined with her apparent access to information that conventional intelligence couldn't obtain, made her irreplaceable. Bromen's relationship with Lin evolved accordingly. Instead of casual social visits to her tea house, their meetings became more structured and frequent. The CIA assigned additional case officers to analyze Lin's intelligence and develop ways to verify and act on her predictions. A special communication protocol was established for reporting her information to headquarters. Most significantly, CIA psychologists and analysts began studying Lin herself, trying to understand how her apparent predictive abilities worked. Was she unconsciously processing information from overheard conversations, observed behavioral patterns, or other conventional sources? Was she connected to a sophisticated North Vietnamese deception operation designed to feed false information to American intelligence? Or was something genuinely paranormal occurring? Dr. James Kellogg, a CIA psychologist who interviewed Lin extensively in late 1967, concluded that her abilities were genuine but inexplicable. Subject displays no evidence of deception, mental illness, or external manipulation, Kellogg wrote in his classified assessment. Her predictions demonstrate consistent accuracy across multiple categories of intelligence. No conventional explanation adequately accounts for her apparent access to future information. The mystery deepened when CIA investigators learned more about Lin's family history. Her grandfather had indeed died during the French colonial period, but he had been a minor village official with no known involvement in resistance activities. Her great-grandfather had fought against French forces in the 1880s, but had died decades before the establishment of communist political movements in Vietnam. Neither ancestor would have had any logical connection to current Viet Cong operations or access to contemporary military planning. Yet Lin's dreams consistently provided accurate information about modern communist activities, often including details that wouldn't become publicly known for months. The CIA's use of Lin's intelligence reached its peak during the Tet Offensive of January 1968. 3 weeks before the communist attacks began, Lin reported a series of dreams involving celebrations that become battles and fireworks that are actually bullets. Her descriptions of coordinated attacks on multiple cities across South Vietnam closely matched what would actually occur during Tet. Unfortunately, like many accurate intelligence predictions, Lin's warnings about Tet were initially discounted by military commanders who couldn't believe that North Vietnamese forces were capable of such a large-scale coordinated offensive. The intelligence was filed and noted, but didn't significantly influence American defensive preparations. After Tet proved Lin's predictions accurate once again, CIA leadership decided to classify her intelligence at the highest levels and ensure it reached decision-makers who could act on it. But by then, American strategy in Vietnam was already shifting toward withdrawal, and opportunities to use Lin's unique capabilities were becoming limited. The end came suddenly in early 1969. During what should have been a routine Tuesday meeting, Lin told Broman that her ancestral spirits had stopped visiting her dreams. "They say their work is finished," she explained. The American war will end soon, and Vietnam must find its own path without interference from the spirit world. Lin never again provided intelligence through dreams. She continued operating her tea house until 1975, when the fall of Saigon forced her to flee to the United States along with thousands of other Vietnamese refugees. The CIA helped her relocate to California, where she lived quietly until her death in 1998. Barry Broman retired from the CIA in 1985 and became a professor of Southeast Asian Studies at Georgetown University. In occasional lectures to intelligence students, he would describe the importance of developing unconventional sources and remaining open to information that might arrive through unexpected channels. He never publicly discussed his work with Lin, but colleagues noted that he always emphasized the limits of rational analysis in understanding human intelligence capabilities. The CIA's files on Source Tea Leaf remain heavily classified, with only brief excerpts released through Freedom of Information Act requests. But those fragments confirm that Lin provided valuable intelligence through methods that CIA analysts never successfully explained. One declassified memo from 1970 notes, Tea Leaf case demonstrates potential value of sources claiming paranormal abilities. While methods remain unexplained, accuracy rate suggests phenomenon deserves continued study for potential operational applications. That study continued through various CIA research programs over the following decades, including investigations into remote viewing, psychic phenomena, and other unconventional intelligence gathering methods. Whether any of these programs successfully replicated Lin's capabilities remains classified. But the legacy of Madame Lin and her ancestral spirit intelligence network continues to influence intelligence thinking about the limits of conventional analysis and the potential value of sources who claim access to information through non-rational means. In a profession built on skepticism and verification, the case of the Vietnamese tea house owner who received accurate intelligence from her dead grandfather remains one of the most compelling challenges to traditional intelligence doctrine. Sometimes the most valuable intelligence comes from the most unlikely sources, through methods that defy explanation but produce results that can't be ignored. Let me tell you about Hans Weber, an East German border guard who became one of the most unlikely double agents in Cold War history, and whose story is so bizarre that even seasoned intelligence officers have trouble believing it actually happened. Hans worked the night shift at Checkpoint Charlie, that infamous crossing point between East and West Berlin that became the symbol of the divided city, which meant long, boring hours staring at a concrete wall and fighting to stay awake while watching for escape attempts that rarely came. But Hans had a problem, or maybe it was a gift, depending on how you look at it. He was a lucid dreamer. Not by choice, not through training or meditation techniques, it just happened naturally. Most nights during his shifts, somewhere between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., when exhaustion and monotony combined to create the perfect conditions for altered consciousness. Hans would find himself dreaming that he was still at his post, still watching the wall, but in his dreams, he could see through it. And I don't mean metaphorically. In these dreams, the Berlin Wall became transparent, like looking through slightly tinted glass, and Hans could observe Western intelligence operations in real time with perfect clarity. He saw CIA operatives setting up dead drops in West Berlin parks, watched West German agents photographing Soviet installations from supposedly secure locations, observed classified meetings in buildings he'd never physically entered and had no logical way of knowing about. To understand how extraordinary this was, you need to appreciate the reality of Hans Weber's situation in 1975. He was 28 years old, a working-class kid from Dresden who'd been drafted into the East German border guards because he was considered politically reliable, meaning he had no family in the West, no history of dissent, and demonstrated the kind of plodding obedience that the socialist system valued in its security personnel. Hans wasn't particularly bright, wasn't particularly ambitious, and certainly wasn't someone you'd expect to become involved in international espionage. His job was mind-numbingly simple. Stand at designated positions along the wall, watch for escape attempts, report anything unusual through proper channels, and try to stay awake during 12-hour shifts that tested the limits of human endurance. The Berlin Wall in 1975 was at the height of its effectiveness as a barrier between East and West. Nearly 15 years after its construction, the wall had evolved from a hastily erected barrier into a sophisticated fortification system. Multiple layers of concrete barriers, barbed wire, guard towers, floodlights, and kill zones created what East German authorities called the anti-fascist protection rampart, though everyone knew its real purpose was keeping East Germans from escaping to the West. Checkpoint Charlie was the most heavily monitored crossing point in the entire system. American, British, French, and Soviet military personnel all maintained permanent presences there, watching each other with the kind of professional paranoia that defined Cold War intelligence operations. Every movement was observed, photographed, analyzed, and reported through multiple channels. It was the last place where you'd expect secrets to be compromised through supernatural means. Hans's lucid dreaming abilities had started during his mandatory military service, probably triggered by the combination of sleep deprivation, stress, and the psychological pressure of living in a totalitarian system where independent thought was actively discouraged. At first, the dreams were just escapist fantasies, imagining himself traveling to places he'd never seen, meeting people he'd never encountered, living experiences that were impossible in his restricted reality. But when Hans was assigned to Checkpoint Charlie duty in late 1974, the dreams began to change. Instead of fantasy scenarios, he started having remarkably realistic dreams about his actual workplace. He would dream that he was standing at his guard post, going through his normal duties, but with enhanced perceptual abilities that allowed him to see and hear things that should have been impossible. The first time Hans experienced what he later called wall transparency dreams, he dismissed it as stress-induced imagination. In the dream, he was standing at his usual position when the concrete barrier in front of him became translucent, and he could see Western intelligence operatives meeting in a cafe on Friedrichstrasse, discussing plans to exfiltrate an East German scientist. Hans woke up convinced that the dream was meaningless, just his subconscious mind creating elaborate spy fantasies based on the Western thriller novels that circulated illegally among border guards. But the next day, he noticed unusual activity around the exact cafe he'd seen in his dream. Western tourists who didn't behave like normal tourists. Surveillance teams that were trying too hard to look casual, the kind of subtle operational indicators that border guards were trained to recognize. Initially, Hans thought this was just coincidence, his conscious mind picking up on real surveillance activities and incorporating them into dream scenarios. But as the dreams continued and became more detailed, the coincidences became too frequent and too specific to explain through normal psychological processes. Hans began paying careful attention to the details in his dreams and comparing them to real-world observations during his shifts. License plate numbers, faces, clothing descriptions, meeting locations, conversation fragments, everything he observed in his dreams proved to be remarkably accurate when verified through conscious surveillance. The breakthrough that would change Hans's life came in February 1975, during one of the most vivid wall transparency dreams he'd ever experienced. In this dream, Hans could see a CIA operative named Jack Morrison meeting with an East German scientist in a safe house in West Berlin. The dream was so detailed that Hans could observe documents being exchanged, photograph numbers being discussed, and specific plans being made for exfiltrating the scientist's family. But here's where it gets really interesting. In the same dream, Hans could also see the meeting from another perspective from inside East German intelligence headquarters, where Stasi officers were monitoring the same CIA operation through their own surveillance network. He watched Stasi agents planning a counter-operation to capture the defecting scientist and roll up the entire Western intelligence network. Hans woke up with the unsettling realization that he was simultaneously observing both sides of an ongoing intelligence operation. His dreams weren't just showing him Western activities. They were providing a complete picture of the spy versus spy games being played out across the divided city. The psychological impact was enormous. Hans found himself in possession of intelligence that could be valuable to either side, depending on which information he chose to act on. He could warn the Stasi about Western operations, or he could somehow alert Western intelligence about East German counter-surveillance activities. The decision about what to do with this information was complicated by Hans's own political views, which were more nuanced than his border guard assignment might suggest. Like many East Germans of his generation, Hans had complicated feelings about the socialist system. He wasn't actively opposed to the government, but he wasn't enthusiastically supportive either. He was trapped in a system he couldn't change, doing a job that provided security but no satisfaction. Hans made his first tentative contact with East German intelligence in March 1975, during a routine security briefing where border guards were encouraged to report any unusual observations or intelligence opportunities. Instead of filing a standard report, Hans requested a private meeting with a Stasi officer, claiming he had information about Western intelligence activities. The meeting was arranged with Lieutenant Colonel Klaus Richter, a veteran Stasi officer who specialized in counterintelligence operations against Western spy networks. Hans's initial approach was cautious. He described having observed suspicious activities among Western personnel at Checkpoint Charlie, without mentioning anything about dreams or supernatural abilities. But as Hans provided increasingly detailed and accurate intelligence about Western operations, Richter began pressing him for information about his sources and methods. How was a simple border guard gaining access to such high-level intelligence about CIA and West German intelligence activities? Finally, under persistent questioning, Hans admitted the truth. He was receiving the information through dreams. He expected Richter to dismiss him as mentally unstable or transfer him to a psychiatric facility for evaluation. Instead, Richter listened carefully, asked detailed questions about the dream experiences, and began testing Hans's claims against other intelligence sources. To Richter's amazement, Hans's dream-derived intelligence consistently proved accurate. Operations that Hans described in detail were confirmed through independent surveillance. Western agents that Hans identified were already known to Stasi counterintelligence, but hadn't been positively identified until Hans provided dream source descriptions. The Stasi codenamed Hans der Traumsprecher, the dream speaker, and assigned him one of their most experienced handlers. Within weeks, Hans was providing regular intelligence briefings based on his nocturnal observations of Western intelligence activities. The information was so valuable that Stasi headquarters began structuring counterintelligence operations around Hans's dream reports. But here's where the story takes an even more bizarre turn. Hans was simultaneously providing information to Western intelligence. The same dreams that revealed Western operations to East German counterintelligence also revealed East German operations to Hans, and he began looking for ways to pass that information to the CIA. The opportunity came through Jack Morrison, the CIA operative Hans had first observed in his dreams. Morrison had been working in Berlin for 3 years, running agents and conducting surveillance operations against Soviet and East German targets. He was exactly the kind of professional intelligence officer who would normally never risk direct contact with an East German border guard. But Hans managed to make contact during one of Morrison's routine visits to Checkpoint Charlie. Using a prearranged signal he'd observed in his dreams, Morrison apparently had a habit of adjusting his watch in a specific way when he wanted to communicate with sources. Hans indicated that he had information to share. The initial contact was terrifying for both men. Morrison couldn't understand how an East German border guard knew his operational signals, and Hans couldn't explain his knowledge without revealing his dream abilities. But the intelligence Hans provided was so accurate and valuable that Morrison decided to risk developing the relationship. For nearly 3 years, Hans Weber operated as a double agent working for both sides simultaneously, providing intelligence gathered through his dreams to both East German and Western intelligence services. The Stasi believed they had recruited a valuable asset with some form of extraordinary surveillance capabilities. The CIA thought they had turned an East German border guard who had access to high-level intelligence through unknown but conventional means. Neither side suspected that Hans was working for both, and neither side understood that his intelligence came from dreams that revealed operations conducted by all parties involved. Hans was unconsciously playing the most dangerous game imaginable, betraying secrets to enemies who were also betraying secrets to each other through his unconscious observations. The intelligence Hans provided was extraordinarily valuable to both sides. His dream observations allowed the Stasi to identify and neutralize multiple Western intelligence operations, leading to the arrest of several CIA and West German intelligence officers. Simultaneously, his warnings to Western intelligence helped prevent the capture of numerous agents and the compromise of sensitive operations. Hans's dreams provided detailed intelligence about Soviet military installations in East Germany, Warsaw Pact communication protocols, plans for internal security crackdowns, and the identities of Western agents who had been compromised by East German counterintelligence. He also observed Western surveillance techniques, CIA safe house locations, planned exfiltration operations, and counterintelligence methods that proved valuable to the Stasi operations. The psychological toll of living this double life was enormous. Hans was constantly terrified of being discovered by either side, knowing that exposure would mean imprisonment, torture, or execution. He suffered from chronic insomnia, ironic for someone whose most valuable skill involved dreaming, and developed nervous habits that his handlers attributed to operational stress. The most disturbing aspect of Hans's situation was his growing realization that his dreams were becoming more detailed and invasive. Initially, he could only observe general activities and conversations, but as his abilities developed, Hans began experiencing dreams where he could access classified documents, overhear private conversations, and even observe the thought processes of intelligence officers on both sides. In his dreams, Hans could see CIA officers planning operations in their secure facilities, read classified cables as they were being transmitted, and observe high-level strategy meetings that determined the direction of Western intelligence operations in Berlin. Simultaneously, he could access Stasi planning sessions, observe Soviet intelligence briefings, and monitor East German political discussions that shaped policy toward the West, the scope of intelligence available through. Hans's dreams were so comprehensive that he began to feel like he was observing the entire Cold War from a perspective that transcended national boundaries. He could see how decisions made in Washington affected operations in Moscow, how Soviet policy changes influenced CIA strategy, how both sides were manipulating events that ordinary people believed were spontaneous or coincidental. But the most unsettling realization was that Hans's dreams weren't just passive observations. He began to suspect that his presence in these dream scenarios was somehow influencing the events he was observing. Intelligence officers on both sides would sometimes change their plans, alter their behavior, or make decisions that seemed to be responses to his dream presence. This raised terrifying questions about the nature of his abilities. Was Hans simply observing events through some form of remote viewing, or was he somehow participating in them? Were his dreams affecting the reality of intelligence operations, or were intelligence operations affecting the content of his dreams? The psychological pressure became unbearable by 1978. Hans was providing intelligence to both sides that was leading to arrests, operational failures, and possibly deaths of people he'd never met but had observed in his dreams. He felt responsible for consequences he couldn't control, trapped in a situation where any action he took would betray someone who trusted him. The end came suddenly and dramatically. In early 1978, both the Stasi and CIA began receiving intelligence reports that suggested the existence of a double agent working for both sides. Counterintelligence investigations on both sides started focusing on individuals with access to the kind of information that had been compromised. Hans realized that both his handlers were becoming suspicious of information that seemed too comprehensive, too detailed, and too perfectly timed to come from conventional sources. Klaus Richter began asking more pointed questions about Hans's sources and methods. Jack Morrison started testing Hans's information against known facts to see if he was being fed disinformation. The final crisis occurred when Hans's dreams revealed that both sides were planning operations to identify and capture the suspected double agent. In a dream that was more like a nightmare, Hans saw himself being interrogated simultaneously by Stasi and CIA officers, each side convinced that he was working for the other. Hans realized that his only option was to disappear before either side could act against him. Using intelligence he'd gathered from his dreams about escape routes and border security procedures, Hans planned his own defection to the West, though defection wasn't quite accurate, since he'd been working for Western intelligence all along. On the night of March 10th, 1978, Hans Weber walked away from his guard post at Checkpoint Charlie and simply never returned. East German authorities launched a massive manhunt, assuming he had defected to the West. Western intelligence agencies conducted their own investigation, believing their agent had been compromised and either captured or killed, but Hans hadn't gone to either side. Using information from his dreams about smuggling routes and safe houses used by various intelligence agencies, Hans had created his own escape network that avoided both East and West German intelligence services. He disappeared into the underground economy of people who existed between the official worlds of both sides. Official records show that Hans Weber died in 1982, supposedly in a car accident in Austria, but intelligence officers familiar with the case suspect this was another false identity created to hide his continued existence. Some believe Hans eventually made his way to South America, where he lived under an assumed identity until his actual death years later. The Stasi files on Der Traumsprecher, released after German reunification, reveal the extent to which East German intelligence relied on Hans's dream-derived intelligence. Operation summaries, agent assessments, and strategic planning documents all reference information provided by the source with extraordinary observational capabilities. CIA files on Hans Weber remain heavily classified, but declassified fragments confirm that American intelligence considered him one of their most valuable assets in Berlin during the 1970s. One memo notes, "Source Looking Glass provided intelligence of exceptional value through unknown methods." Accuracy rate approached 100% across multiple operational categories. Loss of source represents significant degradation of intelligence capabilities in Berlin theater. The most intriguing document is a joint NSA assessment from 1979 that attempts to analyze Hans's claimed abilities from a scientific perspective. The report, written by Dr. Sarah Michel, a psychologist who specialized in intelligence applications of altered consciousness states, concludes subject appeared to demonstrate genuine remote viewing capabilities during sleep states. Phenomenon cannot be explained through conventional psychological or technical means. Recommend continued research into potential applications of dream-based intelligence gathering. That research continued through various classified programs over the following decades, as intelligence agencies attempted to understand and replicate Hans's extraordinary abilities. Whether they succeeded remains unknown, but the existence of these programs demonstrates that Hans Weber's case was taken seriously at the highest levels of the intelligence community. Today, more than 40 years later, the story of the Berlin Wall dreamer remains one of the most puzzling cases in the history of Cold War espionage. Hans Weber somehow managed to simultaneously spy for both sides of the most heavily monitored border in the world, using abilities that defied conventional explanation and provided intelligence that shaped the course of East-West relations during one of the most tense periods of the Cold War. The implications are staggering. If one person could access such comprehensive intelligence through dreams, what does that suggest about the potential capabilities of human consciousness? And if such abilities could be developed and controlled, what would that mean for the future of intelligence gathering and national security? Hans Weber disappeared into history, but the questions raised by his extraordinary case continue to challenge our understanding of the limits of human perception and the possibilities of consciousness-based intelligence gathering. In a world where the most closely guarded secrets were somehow accessible to a dreaming border guard, the boundaries between the possible and impossible become disturbingly unclear. Sometimes the most valuable intelligence comes from sources that exist in the spaces between reality and dreams, between East and West, between the known and unknowable. Hans Weber lived in those spaces, and his story reminds us that the human mind may be capable of gathering information through methods that we're only beginning to understand. Now, let's jump to 2024 and something that sounds like science fiction, but absolutely isn't. We're talking about a breakthrough that makes all those Cold War dream stories look quaint by comparison. A California startup called REMSpace achieved something that espionage agencies have been fantasizing about for decades. It successfully enabled real-time communication between two people while they were both asleep and dreaming. Not metaphorical communication, not symbolic dream sharing, but actual information transfer between unconscious minds separated by thousands of miles. On September 24th, 2024, two participants sleeping in their own homes were connected via specialized equipment that monitored their brainwaves, detected REM sleep patterns, and facilitated direct dream-to-dream communication. When the first participant entered a lucid dream, the system sent him a random word through specially designed earbuds. He repeated the word in his dream, and his response was captured through a combination of brain activity, monitoring, and subvocal speech detection, then stored on a server. 8 minutes later, the second participant entered a lucid dream. She received the stored message from the first participant through the same audio system and confirmed it upon awakening. They had successfully exchanged information through dreams. The first documented chat ever recorded between sleeping minds. The word was shilek, an obscure term that neither participant had any previous knowledge of, making accidental duplication impossible. But before we dive into the technical details and implications of this breakthrough, we need to understand just how revolutionary this moment was. For centuries, human beings have speculated about the possibility of mind-to-mind communication. Ancient cultures developed elaborate rituals designed to share dreams and transfer knowledge through sleep states. Indigenous shamans claimed the ability to visit other people's dreams and exchange information with distant tribe members. Medieval mystics wrote about collective dream experiences that transcended physical boundaries. The difference is that REMSpace didn't just claim to achieve dream communication, they documented it, recorded it, and made it reproducible under controlled scientific conditions. This wasn't folklore or mysticism. It was measurable, verifiable technology that crossed the threshold from speculation to reality. Michael Raduga, REMSpace's founder and CEO, is a Russian entrepreneur who's been researching lucid dreaming and out-of-body experiences for over 15 years. But Raduga isn't some new age mystic or fringe scientist. He's a former software engineer with degrees in computer science and neuroscience who approached dream research with the methodical precision of a technology developer. Raduga's interest in dream communication began during his work on virtual reality systems in the early 2010s. He became fascinated by the similarities between VR environments and lucid dream states, particularly the way both involve conscious navigation through artificial realities that feel completely authentic to the participant. I realized that dreams are essentially biological virtual reality systems, Raduga explained in a 2024 interview. The brain creates fully immersive experiences that can include sensory input, memory access, and complex information processing. If we could interface with those systems the way we interface with computers, we could potentially create communication networks that operate entirely through consciousness. The technical challenges were staggering. First, REMSpace had to develop reliable methods for detecting when someone entered a lucid dream state. This required sophisticated EEG monitoring equipment that could identify the specific brainwave patterns associated with lucid REM sleep while filtering out the electrical noise and movement, artifacts that typically interfere with brain monitoring. Second, they needed to create communication protocols that could work within the chaotic, symbolic environment of dream consciousness. Normal language and logic don't function the same way in dreams, so REMSpace had to develop techniques for transmitting information in forms that the dreaming mind could process and remember upon awakening. Third, they had to solve the timing problem. Lucid dreams are unpredictable. They can last anywhere from a few seconds to over an hour, and they don't occur on command. Coordinating communication between two people who might enter lucid dream states hours apart required sophisticated buffering and storage systems. The breakthrough came through a combination of several technological innovations. REMSpace developed what they call lucid dream detection algorithms that can identify the onset of lucid dreaming with 85% accuracy by analyzing specific patterns in brain activity, eye movement, and muscle tone. When the system detects that a participant has entered a lucid dream, it can immediately begin communication protocols. For message transmission, REM space uses a technique called dream incubation, combined with real-time audio input. Participants wear specially designed earbuds that can deliver audio signals directly into their dreams without waking them up. The audio is processed through filters that make it compatible with dream consciousness-specific frequencies, volumes, and patterns that the sleeping brain can incorporate into dream narratives. The receiving end of the communication uses subvocal speech detection, technology that can identify words and phrases that people think or whisper without making audible sounds. During lucid dreams, many people naturally engage in subvocal speech as they interact with dream characters or narrate their experiences. REM space's equipment can detect these subvocal communications and convert them into digital text or audio. But the September 24th breakthrough was just the beginning. Within weeks, REM space had expanded their system to enable more complex communications. Participants began exchanging not just individual words, but complete phrases, numerical sequences, and even simple images transmitted through audio descriptions that the dreaming mind could visualize. By November 2024, REM space had achieved what they called persistent dream networks, systems that allowed multiple participants to maintain ongoing communication, threads across multiple sleep sessions. Participants could leave dream messages for each other, accessing conversations that had been initiated hours or even days earlier. The implications for espionage and intelligence gathering are absolutely staggering, and you can bet that intelligence agencies around the world took notice immediately. Think about it. If you can communicate with someone while they're dreaming, you've essentially created an untraceable, undetectable communication channel that operates entirely outside conventional surveillance methods. There's no digital footprint, no electronic signatures, no radio emissions that can be intercepted. No physical meetings, no dead drops, no couriers who might be followed or compromised. The communication exists only in the participants' minds, leaving no evidence that any exchange ever occurred. But the intelligence applications go far beyond just secure communication. REM space's technology opens up possibilities for intelligence, gathering that sound like they came straight out of a spy thriller. If you can access someone's dreams, you might be able to extract information directly from their subconscious mind memories. Knowledge, plans, fears, and secrets that they wouldn't reveal under any form of conscious interrogation. The psychological research on dream content shows that people often dream about their daily activities, work-related concerns, and significant life events. Intelligence officers, military personnel, and government officials probably dream about classified information, operational plans, and sensitive conversations. If that dream content could be accessed through external communication systems, it would represent the ultimate intelligence goldmine. Even more disturbing is the possibility of dream manipulation for intelligence purposes. If you can send information into someone's dreams, you might be able to influence their thoughts, plant false memories, or manipulate their decision-making processes. The sleeping mind is generally more susceptible to suggestion than the conscious mind, making dream-based influence operations potentially more effective than traditional propaganda or psychological warfare. REM space claims their current technology requires willing participants who are trained in lucid dreaming techniques and equipped with specialized monitoring equipment. But intelligence agencies have been researching involuntary dream access and manipulation for decades through various classified programs. Declassified CIA documents from the 1960s and 70s show that the agency conducted extensive research into dream-based interrogation and influence techniques as part of their mind control programs. Projects like MKULT included experiments designed to access and manipulate dream content using drugs, hypnosis, and electronic stimulation of the brain. The difference is that REM space has achieved breakthrough capabilities using commercially available technology and voluntary participants. If similar results can be obtained through covert methods, specialized equipment that works without the target's knowledge, or techniques that can induce the necessary brain states through external means, then we're looking at intelligence capabilities that make traditional espionage methods obsolete. Consider the strategic implications. An intelligence agency that masters dream communication could potentially access the unconscious knowledge of foreign leaders, military commanders, scientists, and other key targets. They could plant false information, manipulate decision-making processes, or extract secrets that conventional espionage couldn't obtain. The technology could also be used for counterintelligence purposes. If hostile intelligence agencies are using dream-based espionage techniques, you'd need similar capabilities to detect and counter their operations. This could lead to a new kind of arms race, not nuclear weapons or cyber capabilities, but consciousness-based intelligence systems that operate entirely in the realm of dreams and subconsciousness. REM-Space's public demonstrations have attracted attention from researchers, technology companies, and government agencies around the world. The company has received inquiries from organizations that they won't publicly identify. But industry observers note that several defense contractors and intelligence-related research institutions have expressed interest in licensing or acquiring their technology. Michael Raduga has been carefully diplomatic about the potential intelligence applications of dream communication. In public statements, he emphasizes the positive possibilities, treating PTSD through dream therapy, enhancing creativity through collaborative dreaming, enabling communication with people who have consciousness disorders. But in a candid moment during a private interview in late 2024, Raduga acknowledged the darker possibilities. Any communication technology can be used for beneficial or harmful purposes. Email can carry love letters or terrorist plans. Telephones can connect families or coordinate criminal activities. Dream communication will be the same. The technology is neutral, but the applications will reflect human nature. What makes REM-Space's breakthrough particularly significant is that it proves dream communication is technically feasible using current technology. The company's success eliminates the primary barrier that has prevented wider adoption of dream-based communication systems, the question of whether such systems could actually work. Now that the feasibility has been demonstrated, the development of more sophisticated and covert dream communication systems becomes an engineering challenge rather than a fundamental research question. Intelligence agencies, military organizations, and private companies will inevitably invest in developing dream communication capabilities that are more portable, more reliable, and less detectable than REM-Space's current systems. The timeline for such developments is probably measured in years rather than decades. The basic components: brain activity monitoring, audio transmission, signal processing, and communication protocols are all based on existing technologies that are rapidly becoming smaller, cheaper, and more powerful. Within 5 to 10 years, we could see dream communication systems that are as portable as smartphones, as reliable as conventional radio systems, and as covert as the most sophisticated surveillance equipment. The technology could be embedded in everyday objects: pillows, mattresses, bedroom electronics, making it virtually undetectable to targets who aren't aware they're being monitored. But perhaps the most unsettling aspect of REM-Space's breakthrough is what it reveals about the nature of human consciousness and the boundaries of mental privacy. For most of human history, our dreams have been the most private aspect of our existence, the one space where our thoughts and experiences were completely our own. Dream communication technology shatters that privacy. If our dreams can be accessed, monitored, and manipulated by external systems, then the last sanctuary of human consciousness has been compromised. The implications for personal autonomy, mental freedom, and psychological security are profound and disturbing. The legal and ethical frameworks for regulating dream communication technology are virtually non-existent. Most privacy laws were written long before the possibility of accessing someone's dreams was even conceivable. International law, intelligence oversight systems, and civil rights protections don't address the possibility of consciousness-based espionage or dream-based influence operations. This regulatory vacuum creates opportunities for intelligence agencies and other organizations to develop and deploy dream communication capabilities without effective oversight or legal constraints. By the time lawmakers and ethicists catch up with the technology, sophisticated dream-based intelligence systems may already be operational and entrenched. REM space's breakthrough also raises fundamental questions about the nature of consciousness, information, and reality that philosophers and scientists have been debating for centuries. If dreams can carry accurate information between different minds, what does that suggest about the relationship between consciousness and physical reality? Traditional neuroscience views dreams as internal brain processes, random neural activity that the sleeping mind organizes into narrative experiences. But dream communication suggests that dreams might be more than internal mental phenomena. They might be interfaces to information systems that transcend individual brains. This possibility opens up speculative but intriguing questions about collective consciousness, shared information fields, and the potential for human minds to access knowledge that exists beyond individual memory and experience. Some researchers theorize that dream communication might be tapping into what psychologist Carl Jung called the collective unconscious shared psychological structures that connect all human minds. If such theories prove accurate, then REM space hasn't just developed a communication technology. They've created a window into fundamental aspects of human consciousness that could revolutionize our understanding of minds, information, and reality itself. But regardless of the theoretical implications, the practical reality is clear. Dream communication is no longer science fiction. It's a demonstrated capability that will inevitably be developed for intelligence, military, and commercial applications. The question isn't whether dream-based espionage will become reality. It's how quickly it will be deployed and how society will adapt to living in a world where even our dreams aren't private. Michael Raduga's prediction seems increasingly likely. Yesterday, communicating in dreams seemed like science fiction. Tomorrow, it will be so common we won't be able to imagine our lives without this technology. The transition from science fiction to commonplace reality may happen faster than anyone expects, fundamentally changing the nature of privacy, security, and human consciousness in ways we're only beginning to understand. The age of dream espionage has begun, and REM space's breakthrough is just the opening chapter in a story that will reshape intelligence gathering, international relations, and the very nature of mental privacy in the 21st century. During the Prague Spring of 1968, something extraordinary happened in the world of espionage that still defies explanation today. As Soviet tanks rolled into Czechoslovakia, crushing the brief flowering of political freedom, Western intelligence agencies suddenly found themselves receiving incredibly detailed intelligence about Warsaw Pact troop movements, not from agents in the field, not from satellite reconnaissance, but from an unexpected source, telegraph operators who claimed to be receiving information in their dreams. The phenomenon started with Maria Svoboda, a 34-year-old telegraph operator in Prague who worked the night shift at the Central Communications Hub. Maria had been working for the Czech Postal and Telegraph Service since 1955, a steady job that provided financial security in a communist system where economic opportunities were limited. She was politically neutral, had no connections to Western intelligence, and lived a quiet life focused on her work and caring for her elderly mother. As the political situation in Czechoslovakia deteriorated through the summer of 1968, Maria began having vivid dreams about military activities that seemed far too detailed and specific to be products of her imagination. In these dreams, she would see massive convoys of Soviet tanks and troops moving along specific highways, detailed troop positions around Prague and other major cities, and conversations between Warsaw Pact commanders discussing operational plans. Initially, Maria dismissed these dreams as anxiety-induced fantasies triggered by the political tension that was gripping the country. Like most Czechs, she was acutely aware that Soviet patience with Alexander Dubček's reforms was wearing thin, and military intervention seemed increasingly likely. It was natural that her subconscious mind would be processing these fears through vivid military scenarios. But the dreams contained details that Maria had no way of knowing through normal channels. Specific unit numbers, commander names, radio frequencies, logistical arrangements information that would have been classified at the highest levels of Soviet military planning. Even more disturbing, the dreams often proved prophetically accurate, with military movements occurring exactly as she had envisioned them days earlier. Maria's supervisor at the telegraph office, František Novak, initially dismissed her dream reports as stress-induced nonsense. But when Maria's dream-sourced information proved accurate 3 times in a row, predicting troop movements that were later confirmed by Czech intelligence sources, word spread through Prague's underground networks to contacts who had connections with Western intelligence agencies. The information reached James Crawford, a British intelligence officer stationed in Vienna who maintained a network of sources throughout Eastern Europe. Crawford had been tracking Soviet military preparations for potential intervention in Czechoslovakia, but his intelligence was fragmentary and often contradictory. When he received reports about a Czech telegraph operator who was somehow accessing detailed Soviet military information through dreams, his first instinct was skepticism. But the intelligence was too accurate and too valuable to ignore. Crawford authorized one of his Czech contacts to make careful inquiries about Maria's claims, with strict instructions to avoid anything that might expose her to official attention. What they discovered was both fascinating and terrifying. Maria wasn't the only telegraph operator experiencing these phenomena. Within weeks of the initial reports about Maria, similar cases began emerging from telegraph offices across Prague, Bratislava, and other major cities. Telegraph operators working night shifts, when their facilities were quiet and they had long periods with minimal work activity, were reporting remarkably consistent dream experiences involving Soviet and Warsaw Pact military communications. The pattern was always similar. Operators would dream about being at their telegraph keys, receiving detailed military communications that they would transcribe with perfect accuracy upon waking. The messages contained information about troop dispositions, logistical plans, command structures, and operational timetables that proved accurate when verified through independent intelligence sources. Pavel Novak, a telegraph operator in Bratislava, reported dreams where he received detailed communications about Soviet airborne units being positioned for rapid deployment to Czech airfields. When Western intelligence monitored Soviet military communications using the specific radio frequencies that Pavel had dreamed about, they intercepted actual transmissions containing exactly the information he had described. Miroslav Zerner, who worked at the telegraph office in Brno, dreamed about receiving messages describing Soviet contingency plans for occupying key government buildings in Prague. The plans included detailed building layouts, security procedures, and coordination protocols between different military units. When the actual invasion occurred in August, Soviet forces executed operations that matched Zerner's dream descriptions with unsettling precision. What made these cases truly extraordinary was the technical accuracy of the military information. Telegraph operators are trained in communication procedures and familiar with message formats, but they wouldn't normally have knowledge of Soviet military protocols, unit designations, or operational terminology. Yet the dream communications they reported used authentic Soviet military language and followed proper Warsaw Pact communication procedures. Crawford's investigation expanded as reports continued arriving from multiple sources. By July 1968, Western intelligence had identified at least 12 Czech telegraph operators who were experiencing similar dream phenomena. The information they provided proved valuable for understanding Soviet military preparations and predicting the timing and scope of potential intervention. The most compelling case involved operator Vera Svobodova, no relation to Maria, in Prague, who dreamed about a specific conversation between Soviet General Ivan Pavlovsky and Czech Communist leader Vasil Bilek regarding the timing of military intervention. The dream conversation included details about coordination between Soviet forces and Czech hardliners who supported intervention to end the Prague Spring reforms. When Crawford's network checked this information against other intelligence sources, they found that British signals intelligence had intercepted fragments of communications between Moscow and Prague that matched the conversation Vera had dreamed about. The correlation was so precise that British intelligence initially suspected a security breach. Someone with access to classified intercepts was feeding information to Czech sources, but investigation revealed no security compromises. The telegraph operators had no connections to Western intelligence. No access to classified information, and no apparent means of obtaining the detailed military intelligence they were reporting through their dreams. The phenomenon seemed to be occurring spontaneously, without external influence or coordination. Dr. Robert Hayes, a British psychiatrist who specialized in intelligence applications of psychological phenomena, was brought in to assess the telegraph operator cases. Hayes had previously worked with military personnel who reported prescient dreams about enemy activities during World War II, so he approached the check cases with both skepticism and professional curiosity. Hayes's investigation, conducted through careful interviews with Czech contacts, revealed several consistent patterns across all the reported cases. The dreams always occurred during periods of light sleep or dozing at the telegraph stations, usually between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. when communication traffic was minimal. The operators would dream about receiving messages through their normal telegraph equipment, using familiar procedures and protocols. Most significantly, the dream communications always contained information that the operators couldn't have obtained through normal channels. Military intelligence, classified operational plans, private conversations between higher-ranking officials, material that was closely guarded by Soviet and Warsaw Pact security services. Hayes theorized that the telegraph operators might be unconsciously accessing electromagnetic communications through some form of heightened sensitivity during altered consciousness states. Telegraph equipment was essentially radio receiving equipment, and trained operators developed acute sensitivity to electromagnetic signals and communication patterns. It's possible that these individuals have developed unconscious abilities to detect and process radio communications that their conscious minds would normally filter out. Hayes wrote in his classified assessment, "During dream states, when normal cognitive filters are relaxed, they might be accessing communication signals that exist below the threshold of normal perception." The theory was speculative but not entirely implausible. Telegraph operators worked with electromagnetic communication systems for years, developing unconscious familiarity with signal patterns, frequency characteristics, and communication protocols. If such sensitivity could be enhanced during sleep states, it might explain how they were accessing Soviet military communications that weren't normally detectable by Czech equipment. But the accuracy and specificity of the information suggested something more than unconscious signal detection. The operators were reporting detailed conversations, complex operational plans, and strategic intelligence that would have required conscious analysis and interpretation. Their dreams weren't just picking up random radio signals, they were accessing coherent, meaningful communications with perfect clarity and understanding. The phenomenon reached its peak during the final weeks before the Warsaw Pact invasion of August 20th to 21st, 1968. Telegraph operators across Czechoslovakia reported increasingly urgent and detailed dreams about imminent military action. The dream communications described final preparations, troop movements, and coordination between different invasion forces with extraordinary precision. Maria Svoboda's final significant dream occurred on August 18th, just 2 days before the invasion began. In this dream, she received a detailed communication describing the exact timing of the operation, the routes that Soviet forces would use to enter Prague, and the locations where resistance was expected. The dream was so vivid and disturbing that Maria broke protocol and attempted to contact Czech authorities to warn them about the impending invasion. But by then, Czech intelligence was already aware that Soviet intervention was imminent through conventional sources. Maria's warning was noted but didn't significantly influence defensive preparations. The invasion proceeded exactly as she had dreamed, with Soviet forces following the routes and timetables that had appeared in her dream communication. The telegraph operator dream ceased abruptly after the Warsaw Pact invasion succeeded in crushing the Prague Spring reforms. By September 1968, none of the operators who had been experiencing these phenomena were reporting further dream communications. The ability to access Soviet military intelligence through sleep states seemed to have disappeared as suddenly as it had emerged. Western intelligence analysis of the telegraph operator cases concluded that the phenomenon had been genuine but remained unexplained. The information provided by the operators had proven valuable for understanding Soviet military preparations and confirming intelligence obtained through conventional sources. But the mechanism behind their apparent ability to access classified communications through dreams was never satisfactorily explained. Crawford's final report on the telegraph operator network noted, sources provided consistently accurate intelligence through unexplained means. Information proved valuable for operational planning and threat assessment. Phenomenon appears to have been temporary, possibly related to specific electromagnetic or psychological conditions that existed during the Prague crisis period. The Czech telegraph operators returned to their normal duties after the invasion, working under the restored communist regime that eliminated the political reforms of the Prague Spring. Most emigrated to Western countries during the following years, carrying with them memories of a brief period when their dreams had provided windows into the secret communications of armies and governments. Maria Svoboda eventually settled in Canada, where she worked as a telecommunications technician until her retirement in 1995. In rare interviews about her experiences, she maintained that the dream communications had been completely real and accurate, though she never developed any theory about how they had occurred. I was just doing my job, working the night shift and trying to stay awake, she would say. Then suddenly I was receiving messages that I knew I shouldn't be able to hear. It felt completely normal in the dreams, like I was just transcribing regular telegrams. Only when I woke up did I realize how impossible it all was. The Prague telegraph operator phenomenon remains one of the most intriguing cases of apparent psychic espionage in intelligence history. The operators provided valuable military intelligence through means that conventional science cannot explain, during one of the most critical periods of Cold War tension in Eastern Europe. Whether their abilities represented some form of enhanced electromagnetic sensitivity, unconscious access to collective information fields, or genuine psychic phenomena, the practical result was the same. Ordinary Czech citizens somehow gained access to classified Soviet military communications and provided that intelligence to Western agencies during a moment of international crisis. The implications continue to fascinate intelligence analysts and consciousness researchers decades later, representing a reminder that human perception and information processing capabilities may extend far beyond our current scientific understanding. Meet Alexei Volkov, a Soviet GRU officer who was secretly working for the CIA under the codename Dreamcatcher, and yes, the irony of that codename will become painfully obvious in a moment. But Volkov had a unique problem that would make any intelligence officer's blood run cold. He suffered from chronic nightmares that seemed to reveal classified information from both sides of his double life, creating the most dangerous security breach in the history of espionage. Volkov's nightmares weren't your garden variety. Anxiety dreams about showing up to work naked or forgetting important passwords. These were detailed, hyper-realistic experiences where he found himself in interrogation rooms being questioned about his activities by faceless figures, who seemed to know everything about his work for both the Soviets and the Americans. In these dreams, his unconscious mind would spill secrets with the enthusiasm of a drunken confessor, revealing operational details that he would never consciously disclose under any circumstances. The psychological torture was exquisite in its completeness. Volkov would dream about being interrogated by Soviet counterintelligence officers who suspected his CIA connections, and he would watch helplessly as his sleeping mind revealed names, dates, operational procedures, and classified intelligence that would result in arrests and executions if it ever became real. Then, in the same night, he might dream about being questioned by American officials who somehow knew about Soviet operations that Volkov was involved in through his official GRU duties. What made these nightmares genuinely terrifying from an intelligence perspective wasn't just that Volkov was revealing his own secrets, though that was bad enough. The really disturbing part was that his nightmares contained details about American operations he hadn't been told about through normal CIA channels, and information about Soviet activities that he shouldn't have known through his official duties. It was as if his unconscious mind was accessing classified information from sources that his conscious mind couldn't identify or control. Volkov had been recruited by the CIA in 1976 during his assignment to the Soviet embassy in Mexico City. The recruitment was textbook perfect financial pressure from gambling debts, ideological disillusionment with Soviet policies, and the classic honey trap involving an attractive American woman who turned out to be a CIA operative. Within 6 months, Volkov was providing valuable intelligence about GRU operations throughout Latin America. The nightmare problem started almost immediately after his recruitment, but initially Volkov dismissed it as psychological stress from living a double life. Any intelligent person would experience anxiety dreams when engaged in activities that could result in execution for treason. The human mind processes stress and fear through dream scenarios, often creating elaborate anxiety fantasies that reflect our deepest concerns about discovery and punishment. But as Volkov's nightmares became more frequent and detailed, he began to realize that they contained information he had no conscious access to. Names of CIA operatives he'd never met, details about Soviet intelligence operations he wasn't involved in, classified technical information about weapons, systems and communication protocols that were far beyond his security clearance level. The breakthrough or breakdown, depending on your perspective, came in early 1979 when Volkov reported to his CIA handler that he'd had a nightmare about a planned Soviet assassination operation in Western Europe. The dream was extraordinarily detailed. Target identification, operational timeline, weapon specifications, escape routes, even the cover identities that would be used by the assassination team. Elizabeth Chun, Volkov's CIA case officer, initially treated this as potentially valuable intelligence that Volkov had obtained through his official GRU duties and was reporting through the fictional dream story to provide himself with psychological cover. Intelligence officers often use elaborate justifications to rationalize their betrayal of classified information, and claiming to have learned secrets through dreams was unusual but not unprecedented. But when Chen checked Volkov's dream information against other intelligence sources, she discovered that the assassination plot he described was real, accurate, and contained details that Volkov should have had no way of knowing. The target was a Soviet defector living in Paris under CIA protection. The timeline matched intelligence obtained from other sources, and the operational details were consistent with known Soviet assassination techniques. Most disturbing of all, Volkov's nightmare had provided early warning about an operation that American intelligence had been unable to detect through conventional methods. The CIA immediately moved to protect their asset and began developing countermeasures against the Soviet assassination team. The operation was successfully disrupted, potentially saving the defector's life and preventing a major intelligence disaster. June realized that she was dealing with something far more complex and potentially valuable than a standard double-agent relationship. She contacted CIA headquarters and requested support from specialists who could analyze and exploit whatever psychological phenomenon was allowing Volkov to access classified information through his nightmare experiences. Dr. Margaret Brennan, the same psychiatrist who had studied the Rosenberg Network's shared dreams, was assigned to develop what became known as the Nightmare Protocol, a systematic approach to extracting intelligence from Volkov's dreams while ensuring the information flow remained secure and didn't compromise ongoing operations. The Nightmare Protocol involved weekly meetings between Volkov and Dr. Brennan, disguised as routine psychological counseling sessions that would be normal for a Soviet intelligence officer experiencing stress from foreign assignment duties. During these sessions, Brennan would use specialized interview techniques to help Volkov recall and analyze his nightmare experiences in detail. The process was remarkably sophisticated, combining elements of psychoanalysis, intelligence debriefing, and experimental psychology. Brennan would guide Volkov through systematic recall of his nightmare scenarios, helping him identify specific details about people, places, operations, and classified information that appeared in his dreams. She then cross-referenced this information with known intelligence requirements and ongoing CIA operations. The results exceeded everyone's expectations. Volkov's nightmares provided early warnings about Soviet counterintelligence operations that were targeting CIA assets throughout Europe and Latin America. The dreams revealed the identities of other double agents working for both sides, exposed planned Soviet operations against Western targets, and even uncovered assassination plots against American intelligence officers. But the intelligence flow wasn't unidirectional. Volkov's nightmares also revealed detailed information about CIA operations that he wasn't supposed to know about, suggesting that his unconscious mind was somehow accessing American classified information as well as Soviet secrets. This created both opportunities and security risks that CIA analysts struggled to understand and control. The most valuable intelligence came from what Brennan categorized as operational preview dreams, nightmares where Volkov experienced future events with remarkable accuracy. He would dream about Soviet intelligence meetings that hadn't happened yet, CIA operations that were still in the planning stages, and counterintelligence activities that wouldn't occur for weeks or months. In one particularly significant case, Volkov dreamed about a planned Soviet operation to penetrate NATO's nuclear command structure by recruiting a senior British intelligence officer. The dream provided detailed information about the recruitment approach, the operational timeline, and even the specific inducements that would be offered to the target. CIA counterintelligence used this information to identify the British officer and implement protective measures that prevented the recruitment from succeeding. But the psychological toll on Volkov was enormous. The constant nightmare experiences were destroying his ability to get restful sleep, leading to chronic exhaustion that affected his performance in both his official Soviet duties and his covert CIA work. He began using stimulants to stay alert during the day, then alcohol and sedatives to try to achieve dreamless sleep at night. The medication regimen created additional problems. Stimulants made Volkov jittery and paranoid during intelligence meetings, raising the risk that his Soviet handlers would notice behavioral changes that might indicate treasonous activities. Sedatives and alcohol affected his judgment and memory, potentially compromising his ability to protect classified information and maintain operational security. Dr. Brennan attempted to help Volkov manage the psychological stress through various therapeutic techniques, but the fundamental problem couldn't be resolved as long as he continued living a double life. The nightmares seemed to be a psychological manifestation of the impossible stress created by simultaneous loyalty to opposing intelligence services. The situation became critical in 1980 when Volkov reported nightmares about his own exposure and arrest. In these dreams, he would experience detailed interrogation scenarios where Soviet counterintelligence officers confronted him with evidence of his CIA connections. The dreams were so vivid and realistic that Volkov began having difficulty distinguishing between nightmare experiences and potential real memories. Even more disturbing, Volkov's arrest nightmares contained accurate information about Soviet counterintelligence techniques and procedures that he shouldn't have known through his normal GRU duties. The dreams described specific interrogation methods, psychological pressure techniques, and security protocols used by the KGB's internal security directorate information that was closely guarded even within Soviet intelligence circles. Chun and her CIA supervisors faced an impossible dilemma. Volkov's nightmares were providing incredibly valuable intelligence that was helping protect American operations and personnel throughout Europe. But the psychological pressure was destroying Volkov's mental health and increasing the risk that he would be discovered by Soviet counterintelligence. The decision was made to attempt extraction, bringing Volkov to the United States, where he could be debriefed extensively and provided with protection from Soviet retaliation. But Volkov's deteriorating psychological condition made him increasingly unreliable and unpredictable, complicating extraction planning and raising the risk of operational failure. The end came in 1981, but not in the way anyone expected. During a routine polygraph examination that was standard procedure for GRU officers, Volkov's sleep-deprived and medication-affected state caused him to respond erratically to questions about his loyalty and activities. The polygraph results didn't necessarily indicate treasonous behavior, but they were abnormal enough to attract attention from Soviet security officers. Under normal circumstances, unusual polygraph results might have led to additional questioning, temporary suspension of duties, or transfer to a less sensitive position. But Volkov's psychological state was so fragile that he interpreted the security attention as evidence that his nightmares about exposure and arrest were becoming reality. In a moment of panic-induced irrationality, Volkov attempted to contact his CIA handler using emergency communication procedures that were only supposed to be used in extreme circumstances. The communication was intercepted by Soviet counterintelligence, providing conclusive evidence of his treasonous activities. Volkov was arrested, charged with treason, and disappeared into the Soviet prison system. Official records indicate that he died in custody in 1983, though the circumstances of his death were never clarified. CIA debriefing reports suggest that Volkov may have suffered a complete psychological breakdown during interrogation, making him unable to provide coherent information to his Soviet captors. Dr. Brennan's final assessment of the Nightmare Protocol noted both its extraordinary intelligence value and its ultimate failure. Dreamcatcher demonstrated that the subconscious mind may be our most valuable intelligence asset and our greatest security risk. The subject's ability to access classified information through nightmare experiences provided intelligence of exceptional value, but the psychological toll proved unsustainable. The human mind may not be capable of processing the cognitive dissonance created by simultaneous access to opposing intelligence systems. The Nightmare Protocol was classified at the highest levels and never repeated with other double agents. The psychological risks were considered too great, and the unpredictable nature of dream-based intelligence made it unsuitable for systematic exploitation. But the case files were preserved and studied by CIA psychologists for decades, contributing to ongoing research into consciousness-based intelligence gathering techniques. Volkov's case demonstrated both the extraordinary potential and the inherent dangers of accessing classified information through altered consciousness states. His nightmares had provided intelligence that saved lives and protected operations, but the psychological price was ultimately his own sanity and life. The human mind, it seemed, had limits that even the most valuable intelligence couldn't justify exceeding. The legacy of Dreamcatcher continues to influence CIA, thinking about the psychological welfare of double agents and the ethical boundaries of intelligence exploitation. Some secrets, the case suggested, might be too dangerous for human consciousness to contain, even in the service of national security. Now, let's slow down a bit and explore the fascinating history of how different cultures have understood the connection between dreams and hidden knowledge. Because what we're talking about isn't new. Humans have been trying to extract secrets from the sleeping mind for thousands of years, and the techniques we've discussed tonight are just the latest chapter in a story that stretches back to the dawn of civilization. Ancient civilizations took dream intelligence seriously in ways that would make modern intelligence analysts envious. In Egypt, pharaohs employed professional dream interpreters who doubled as intelligence analysts. And these weren't just mystics reading tea leaves, they were sophisticated operations that combined religious authority with practical espionage capabilities. The dream interpreters would analyze the sleep visions of foreign diplomats, captured prisoners, and even their own spies to extract strategic information that conventional interrogation couldn't obtain. Egyptian dream interpretation wasn't random. Symbolism, it followed systematic methodologies that were remarkably similar to modern psychological analysis. Dream interpreters were trained to recognize patterns, identify psychological stress indicators, and extract factual information from symbolic content. They understood that the sleeping mind processes information differently than conscious thought, often revealing knowledge that the dreamer wouldn't consciously share. The Greeks developed the concept of oneiromancy, divination, through dreams, but what's fascinating is how they used it for military intelligence rather than just spiritual guidance. Spartan generals would regularly consult dream interpreters before major battles, not just for divine guidance, but because they believed dreams could reveal enemy troop positions, battle plans, and strategic intentions. The interpreters would analyze dreams reported by soldiers, captured enemies, and civilian populations to build comprehensive intelligence pictures. Greek military dream analysis was surprisingly sophisticated. They understood that anxiety dreams often contained accurate information about genuine threats. That symbolic imagery could represent real geographical features or tactical situations, and that the subconscious mind might process observational details that conscious awareness missed. It was essentially an early form of psychological intelligence gathering that recognized the value of unconscious information processing. Jump forward to medieval Europe, and you'll find that many royal courts employed dream readers, who served dual roles as both spiritual advisors and intelligence analysts. These individuals would interpret the dreams of courtiers, diplomats and foreign visitors looking for information about political plots, military preparations, and economic conditions in other kingdoms. The practice was so common that diplomatic protocols included specific procedures for protecting sensitive information from dream-based espionage. Medieval dream interpretation combined religious mysticism with practical intelligence analysis. Dream readers were trained to distinguish between spiritually significant visions and psychologically revealing content, focusing on details that might provide actionable intelligence about political and military situations. They understood that dreams often reflected the dreamer's real knowledge, fears, and observations, making them valuable sources of information about foreign intentions and capabilities. But it was during World War II that dream-based intelligence gathering first became systematized by modern intelligence agencies. Both the Allies and the Axis powers conducted research into what they called unconscious intelligence acquisition, the idea that the human mind might be capable of gathering information through non-conventional means during sleep states. The research was driven by desperate need for any advantage that might influence the war's outcome. The SS predecessor to the CIA established a classified program called Project Morpheus in 1943. The goal was to determine whether captured enemy agents could be made to reveal information through dream analysis and manipulation. They experimented with sleep deprivation, dream interruption techniques, and various drugs to enhance dream recall and extract intelligence that conventional interrogation couldn't obtain. Project Morpheus researchers found that subjects under controlled conditions sometimes revealed information during dream states that they wouldn't divulge under normal interrogation. The sleeping mind appeared to be less capable of maintaining the psychological defenses that protected classified information during conscious questioning. However, the reliability and controllability of dream-based intelligence extraction remained problematic throughout the war. The Soviets took a different approach, focusing on using dreams as a communication method rather than an extraction technique. KGB researchers developed techniques for implanting specific scenarios into agents' dreams, allowing them to pass complex instructions without risk of interception. The method was based on understanding how external stimuli could influence dream content through careful timing and environmental manipulation. Soviet dream communication research was remarkably advanced for its time. They discovered that specific audio frequencies, electromagnetic fields, and chemical compounds could influence dream content in predictable ways. By the 1950s, KGB handlers could implant detailed operational instructions into agents' dreams, creating communication channels that were virtually undetectable by counterintelligence services. From the scientific perspective, what we're really talking about is the intersection of neuroscience, psychology, and information processing. During REM sleep, the brain processes and consolidates information from the day, often making connections and revealing patterns that the conscious mind missed. The sleeping brain is incredibly active, sometimes more active than when we're awake, with different regions communicating in ways that don't happen during conscious states. Modern neuroscience has shown that the sleeping brain can access memories, process complex information, and even solve problems that stunt conscious analysis. Dreams aren't just random neural static, they're sophisticated information processing sessions where the mind organizes, analyzes, and sometimes discovers new insights about stored knowledge and recent experiences. The REM sleep phase, when most vivid dreams occur, is characterized by intense brain activity in areas associated with memory consolidation, pattern recognition, and emotional processing. During these periods, the mind can access information that's normally suppressed. make connections between seemingly unrelated data, and sometimes reveal knowledge that the conscious mind doesn't realize it possesses. But here's where it gets really interesting for intelligence applications. The sleeping mind appears to be more susceptible to external influence than conscious awareness. Carefully timed audio signals, electromagnetic stimulation, and pharmaceutical enhancement can affect dream content in ways that might allow extraction or implantation of specific information. It's like hacking the brain's information processing system while it's in maintenance mode. The recent breakthrough by REM space proves that direct communication during dream states is not only possible, but reproducible under controlled conditions. They've essentially created the first functional dream-based communication network, something intelligence agencies have been trying to develop for decades. The technology eliminates the primary barrier that prevented wider adoption of dream communication systems, the question of whether such systems could actually work. But the implications go far beyond just communication. If you can influence someone's dreams, if you can access their unconscious knowledge, if you can implant suggestions or extract information, you've essentially created the perfect intelligence tool. No physical meeting, no risk of surveillance, no digital footprint. The communication exists only in the participants' minds, leaving no evidence that any exchange ever occurred. The technology could also be used for counterintelligence purposes. If hostile intelligence agencies are using dream-based espionage techniques, you'd need similar capabilities to detect and counter their operations. This could lead to a new kind of arms, race not nuclear weapons or cyber capabilities, but consciousness-based intelligence systems that operate entirely in the realm of dreams and subconsciousness. What makes this particularly relevant to espionage is that the sleeping mind processes information differently than the conscious mind. It makes connections, reveals patterns, and sometimes accesses memories that are normally inaccessible. For intelligence work, this represents an entirely new frontier that could revolutionize how we gather, analyze, and protect sensitive information. The historical pattern is clear. Every major technological breakthrough eventually finds its way into intelligence work. Radio, radar, computers, satellites, the internet all were originally developed for other purposes, but quickly adapted for espionage. Dream communication and dream manipulation are likely following the same path, with intelligence agencies around the world racing to develop operational capabilities. The ethical considerations are staggering. Dream-based intelligence gathering represents a violation of mental privacy that goes beyond anything we've seen before. It's not just reading someone's mail or tapping their phone, it's literally entering their unconscious mind. The legal frameworks for regulating such capabilities don't exist because lawmakers never anticipated that accessing someone's dreams would be technologically possible. This regulatory vacuum creates opportunities for intelligence agencies to develop and deploy dream-based capabilities without effective oversight or legal constraints. By the time lawmakers and ethicists catch up with the technology, sophisticated dream-based intelligence systems may already be operational and entrenched in ways that make regulation difficult or impossible. But perhaps the most unsettling aspect is what dream-based intelligence capabilities reveal about the nature of human consciousness and mental privacy. For most of history, our dreams have been the most private aspect of our existence, the one space where our thoughts and experiences were completely our own. Dream access technology shatters that privacy completely. If our dreams can be monitored, influenced, and exploited for intelligence purposes, then the last sanctuary of human consciousness has been compromised. The implications for personal autonomy, mental freedom, and psychological security are profound and disturbing, raising questions about the boundaries of acceptable intelligence gathering in democratic societies. The future of dream-based intelligence gathering will likely depend on the same factors that have shaped espionage throughout history: technological capability, operational necessity, and ethical constraints. As the technology becomes more sophisticated and accessible, intelligence agencies will inevitably develop capabilities that push the boundaries of what society considers acceptable. The question isn't whether dream-based espionage will become widespread. How society will adapt to living in a world where even our dreams aren't private. and how we'll balance the security benefits of consciousness-based intelligence gathering against the fundamental human right to mental privacy. Let's drift into some truly strange territory now, with facts so obscure they barely exist in the official record. These are the cases that exist in margin notes, classified addendums, and the faded memories of retired intelligence officers who probably shouldn't be talking about them. Stories that slip through the cracks of history, too bizarre for official documentation but too persistent to disappear entirely. Obscure Fact 1. The Dream Frequency Project, 1971, deep in the Nevada desert. A joint NASA-CIA research project discovered something that would make even seasoned intelligence officers question the boundaries of human consciousness. The facility, hidden within what appeared to be a routine space research installation, was conducting experiments that officially didn't exist and legally never happened. The researchers had stumbled upon the fact that certain electromagnetic frequencies could influence dream content when broadcast at precisely the right moments during REM sleep cycles. But this wasn't accidental discovery. It was the result of systematic experimentation using volunteer subjects who believed they were participating in sleep studies designed to help astronauts adapt to the psychological challenges of long-duration space missions. The key frequency was 783 Hz, the same resonant frequency as Earth's natural electromagnetic field, known as the Schumann resonance. When this frequency was broadcast directly into the brains of sleeping subjects during deep REM mazes, something extraordinary happened. People began having remarkably consistent dream scenarios, as if they were all tuning into the same unconscious broadcast network. But the real breakthrough came when researchers discovered that subjects who concentrated on specific topics before sleep would dream about related classified information they had no conscious knowledge of. A test subject thinking about Soviet space programs would dream about classified details of their lunar research. Someone focusing on Chinese military capabilities would experience dreams containing accurate intelligence about weapon systems they'd never heard of. The implications were staggering and terrifying. The human brain, when influenced by the right electromagnetic frequency during sleep, appeared to become a receiving station for information that existed somewhere beyond individual consciousness. It was as if the subjects were accessing a kind of collective intelligence database that contained knowledge from sources they'd never encountered. The project ran for 18 months before being abruptly terminated. Several test subjects had begun reporting dreams that contained accurate details about classified American military installations they had never visited, weapon systems they had no clearance to know about, and operational plans that were known only to the highest levels of government. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, the project's lead researcher, wrote in her final report, subjects appeared to be accessing information through unknown mechanisms during electromagnetically influenced sleep states. The source of this information cannot be identified through conventional means. Recommend immediate classification upgrade and project termination due to potential security implications. The facility was abandoned, the equipment was destroyed, and all records of the specific frequencies and broadcast methods remain classified at levels so high that most intelligence officials don't know the project ever existed. The volunteer subjects were debriefed, sworn to secrecy, and quietly transferred to other assignments where their newfound abilities couldn't pose security risks. But whispers persist in certain intelligence circles about the frequency that can unlock human consciousness, about dreams that reveal secrets from across the world, and about the terrible possibility that somewhere, someone might still be broadcasting on 7.83 Hz, turning sleeping minds into unwitting intelligence-gathering networks. Obscure Fact 2. The Sleepwalking Spy Network, 1968. During the Prague Spring, as political tensions reached their breaking point, Czech intelligence identified a phenomenon so bizarre that it took them months to believe their own surveillance reports. Western diplomats, journalists, and business representatives were sleepwalking into classified areas of government buildings and photographing documents while completely unconscious. The incidents began in March 1968, when security cameras at the Foreign Ministry captured footage of a British trade attaché wandering through restricted corridors at 3 a.m. methodically photographing documents with a camera he had no memory of possessing. When confronted the next morning, the attaché was genuinely bewildered. He had no memory of leaving his hotel room and no explanation for how classified Czech documents had ended up on his camera film. Czech security initially suspected sophisticated espionage techniques, possibly involving hypnosis or advanced psychological manipulation. But medical examinations confirmed that the subjects were genuinely sleepwalking during these incidents. Their brain activity showed patterns consistent with somnambulism, not conscious deception. What made the phenomenon truly inexplicable was the selectivity and sophistication of the sleepwalking espionage. The unconscious spies didn't wander randomly through government buildings. They moved with purpose, targeting the most sensitive documents and avoiding security measures with an efficiency that would have impressed professional intelligence officers. Investigation revealed that all affected individuals had been staying at the same hotel near Wenceslas Square. The hotel's ventilation system had been modified to distribute specific audio frequencies throughout the building during nighttime hours, frequencies designed to induce sleepwalking while maintaining enough consciousness for complex tasks like document photography. The audio frequencies had been developed by Soviet researchers studying sleep-based espionage techniques. The technology could trigger sleepwalking episodes in susceptible individuals, while implanting basic operational instructions through subconscious suggestion. The sleepwalkers would carry out intelligence-gathering missions without any conscious awareness of their activities. Over 6 months, the operation collected more than 200 classified Czech documents through their unknowing sleepwalking assets. The intelligence included diplomatic communications, military planning documents, and political strategy papers that provided Western agencies with unprecedented insights into Warsaw Pact decision-making during the crisis period. The hotel operation was finally discovered when a security guard noticed that several guests were leaving their rooms at the same time each night, moving through the building with identical methodical patterns. Surveillance revealed the full scope of the sleepwalking spy network and led to the discovery of the audio frequency equipment hidden in the hotel's infrastructure. The operation was shut down immediately, but not before it had demonstrated that human consciousness could be manipulated to conduct sophisticated espionage operations without the subject's knowledge or consent. The sleepwalking spies returned to normal behavior patterns once the audio frequency broadcasts ended, with no memory of their nocturnal intelligence activities. Czech intelligence files on the sleepwalking network remained classified until 1993, when they were released as part of post-communist government transparency initiatives. Western intelligence agencies studied the documents extensively, leading to research programs designed to understand and potentially replicate the sleep-based espionage techniques. The ethical implications were profound and disturbing. If people could be turned into unconscious intelligence assets through electromagnetic manipulation, the boundaries between voluntary cooperation and involuntary exploitation became meaningless. Anyone staying in the wrong hotel, working in the wrong building, or living in the wrong area could potentially be transformed into an unwitting spy. Obscure Fact 3. The comatose code breaker, 1959. In a Berlin hospital room in 1959, CIA cryptographer Patricia Morrison lay in a coma following a severe car accident. Her consciousness apparently lost to the world of intelligence analysis forever. But her unconscious mind had other plans. It continued solving some of the most complex cryptographic puzzles of the Cold War, communicating solutions through subtle hand movements that would revolutionize understanding of human cognitive capabilities. Morrison had been one of the CIA's most brilliant codebreakers, specializing in Soviet diplomatic ciphers that had resisted analysis by entire teams of conscious cryptographers. Her injury occurred during what appeared to be a routine traffic accident, but intelligence officials suspected it might have been an assassination attempt by Soviet agents who had identified her as a significant threat to their communication security. The discovery of Morrison's unconscious code-breaking abilities happened by accident. William Hayes, her CIA partner both professionally and personally, was sitting beside her hospital bed reading classified intercepts aloud. partly from habit and partly in the desperate hope that familiar work content might somehow reach her consciousness and aid in her recovery. During one of these sessions, Hayes noticed that Morrison was making subtle finger movements, tiny tapping patterns that seemed to correspond to the rhythmic structure of the encrypted messages he was reading. Initially, he dismissed these movements as random neurological activity, the kind of involuntary responses that coma patients sometimes exhibit. But when Hayes began paying closer attention to the timing and patterns of Morrison's finger movements, he realized they weren't random at all. The tapping sequences followed mathematical relationships that corresponded to cryptographic solutions. Morrison's unconscious mind was processing the encrypted messages and providing answers through the only communication method available to her. Hayes began systematically testing Morrison's unconscious abilities, reading increasingly complex encrypted intercepts and recording her finger tap responses. The results were extraordinary. Her comatose mind could solve ciphers that had stumped entire teams of conscious analysts, often providing solutions within minutes of hearing the encrypted text. For 3 months, the CIA used Morrison's unconscious mind as their most valuable cryptographic resource. Intelligence officers would visit her hospital room daily, reading unsolved intercepts while recording her finger tap solutions. Her unconscious analysis cracked diplomatic codes, military communications, and intelligence messages that had been considered unbreakable. The intelligence breakthrough was enormous. Morrison's unconscious code-breaking revealed Soviet diplomatic strategies, military planning documents, and intelligence operations that influenced American policy throughout the height of Cold War tensions. Her sleeping mind provided insights that shaped nuclear deterrence strategies, diplomatic negotiations, and counterintelligence operations. But the phenomenon raised disturbing questions about the nature of consciousness and cognitive ability. Morrison's unconscious mind demonstrated mathematical and analytical capabilities that exceeded her conscious performance, suggesting that human intelligence might be severely limited by the constraints of conscious awareness. Medical examination revealed that Morrison's brain injury had created unusual neural pathways that enhanced pattern recognition and mathematical processing during unconscious states. The damage that had destroyed her conscious awareness had somehow liberated cognitive resources that were normally inaccessible to wakeful minds. Morrison eventually recovered from her coma but retained no memory of her unconscious code-breaking activities. When shown the intercepts she had solved while unconscious, she was unable to crack them using normal conscious methods. Her unconscious analytical abilities had disappeared with the return of conscious awareness, as if the two states of mind were mutually exclusive. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the CIA psychiatrist who studied Morrison's case, concluded that unconscious cognitive states might provide access to mental resources that conscious awareness actually inhibits. The subject demonstrated enhanced analytical capabilities during coma that exceeded conscious performance, Mitchell wrote. Unconscious mind may access cognitive resources that conscious thought processes suppress or override. Morrison returned to CIA cryptographic work but was quietly monitored for the rest of her career, with intelligence officials hoping that her extraordinary unconscious abilities might resurface under different circumstances. She died in 1987, taking with her the secrets of how the unconscious mind had accomplished analytical feats that conscious intelligence couldn't match. The implications of Morrison's case continue to influence intelligence thinking about cognitive enhancement, consciousness-based analysis, and the untapped potential of human mental capabilities. If unconscious minds can outperform conscious analysis, what does that suggest about the limitations we place on human intelligence through conscious thought processes? The case files remain classified, but fragments released through Freedom of Information Act requests confirm that Morrison's unconscious code-breaking provided some of the most valuable intelligence breakthroughs of the Cold War. Her sleeping mind had achieved what teams of conscious analysts couldn't accomplish, revealing the extraordinary analytical capabilities that might exist beneath the surface of human awareness. Well, if you're somehow still awake, which honestly surprises me, we've just taken a journey through some of the most bizarre intersections of human consciousness and espionage in recorded history. From British agents receiving cipher keys in musical dreams, to Soviet operators picking up radio transmissions in the Antarctic night, to modern scientists proving that dream communication isn't just possible, it's reproducible. We're looking at a frontier that challenges everything we thought we knew about intelligence gathering. The line between sleep and waking, between conscious knowledge and unconscious awareness, turns out to be far more permeable than we ever imagined. And in the world of espionage, where information is power and power shapes history, the sleeping mind might just be the final frontier. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from tonight, what time it is in your corner of the world, and whether any of this has given you second thoughts about what your own dreams might be telling you. Have you ever had dreams that felt too real, too detailed, too specific to be mere fantasy? You might be surprised at what your unconscious mind is actually capable of. Until next time, sleep well, dream deep, and remember, in the world of espionage, even your dreams might not be entirely your own.